Egyptian mythology. The daily life of the god of the desert. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 51, Delimitation of Scope. The high priest looked at the young Damses with envy in his eyes. Damses, aging is irreversible, facing the increasingly powerful tribe with an aging body. I will regret being born too early, so I used up all my life to prophesy for myself and the tribe. Then I will go to the underworld under the protection of the Lord Desert God. The prophecy tells me that I will still be a human after reincarnation. And as long as the tribe firmly believes in Lord Desert God, it will become extremely powerful. Damses, may Lord Desert God protect you and the tribe forever. The high priest died after leaving the last words peacefully. Damses shed tears silently. After a moment, Damses wiped away his tears, stood up and walked out the door. Go inform Chiowo that the high priest has passed away. The high priest is fair and just in his dealings with others, and his funeral will be handled according to the highest standards. Yes, the two tribal warriors replied in unison with grief on their faces. After explaining the matter, Damses went to the temple of the desert god built in the oasis. Everything in the temple was modeled after the temple's internal and external structures that they saw when they sought the blessing of the desert god. Along the way, the tribesmen saluted respectfully, and Damses responded one by one. When they arrived at the temple, two tribal warriors were guarding the door, and there was no one inside, because the temple only allows ordinary people from the tribe to enter during sacrifices, to prevent any blasphemy against the desert god. Priest. The two tribal warriors saluted. Damses nodded and stepped into the temple. Walking to the statue devoutly and respectfully, Damses knelt down and prayed. Honorable and great desert god, the high priest who led our tribe to believe in you has just passed away. I hope you can bless the high priest's soul and let him reincarnate smoothly. Seth stood in mid-air listening to Damses' prayers and cast his eyes on the sacrificial temple. The sacrificial temple and the desert temple are separate. The tribesmen can enter the sacrificial temple anytime and anywhere to worship the desert god. In the sacrificial temple, Seth saw the dead spirit of the old priest. Because it was daytime, the dead spirit of the old priest could only stay in the temple. Seth had a very good impression of this old priest who did not recommend himself as a priest and gave power to Damses, so he gave him a blessing without hesitation. He had just arrived at the water-grass oasis not long ago. This oasis is very large, and they have begun to plant Osiris's wheat seeds. If nothing unexpected happens, it can feed 400,000 people. At present, there are less than 400,000 people here, only 200,000. Seth is satisfied with this. He is the desert itself, so he naturally knows the population situation of other oases. In short, this oasis has potential. Damses can indeed control the entire oasis, even if he is only a teenager. Seth raised his hand and gave Damses a trace of power and the gift of war. For humans, this trace of gift is enough for him to fight 100. After giving the gift, Seth left the water-grass oasis. Then he began to define the scope of the desert in the future. He wanted to include the oasis of water and grass, and he could rebuild his temple at any time. It only consumed a little divine power, so it would not be a problem. Soon, Seth used his divine power to define the scope. When Isis and Osiris flattened the desert, they would see his divine power. However, Seth still wrote to the two gods, asking them to prepare to flatten the desert. Then, Seth notified the gods who depended on the desert for survival. Those who were completely dependent on the desert went to his temple and began to prepare for migration. The gods whose power could survive in the plains and deserts considered whether to migrate or not. In the swamp, a magnificent temple was suspended in the air. Shu sat in the temple, looking at Thoth beside him, and comforted him. Think more positively. Thoth sighed, and when Seth asked Thoth about the situation in the underworld, he knew that Seth was planning to attack the underworld. Moreover, he also knew that the gods were afraid of and dissatisfied with Seth. Guessing that they would force Seth to give in through the divine council, and thus execute the oracle of Ra, Thoth went to Shu. He verified his guess from him, and also learned that Seth decided to voluntarily give up the territory. Unfortunately, a god bypassed Shu and complained to Ra. Ra personally convened the divine council. Thoth asked Shu to ask Ra to give Seth new authority after Seth said that he would voluntarily give up the desert territory. God really can't have the fourth authority, Thoth said disappointedly. What he wanted to verify was this guess. Can God have the fourth authority? A long time ago, he had this doubt after his request to Ra for a new authority was rejected. Shu knew Thoth's regret, so he said, "It doesn't matter if you can't have the fourth authority." Little Seth gave up 70% of the desert. The number of humans will increase rapidly, and the underworld will also accelerate its recovery. When the god of the underworld is born, you can study the underworld through him. At this time, Mot, with ostrich feathers in his hair, walked out of the temple. Shu, Thoth, I found a gathering place of humans worshipping evil gods nearby. I'm going to wipe out that gathering place. I'll go with you. Thoth stood up and said. Then the two left. Shu smiled helplessly. Thoth really couldn't leave Mot. However, the problem of evil gods. As the number of humans increases, the power of faith will increase accordingly. Even if the gods protect humans, I'm afraid that the appearance of evil gods cannot be avoided. Moreover, they may be more powerful than the evil gods that have appeared so far. Out of this worry, Shu sent a letter to Osiris. He wanted to know how long it would take for a life to cover the territory abandoned by Set. After that, he would convene a meeting of gods. Yellow Sand Temple. Set sat on the throne and looked at the 31 gods in the temple. When he returned to the Yellow Sand Temple, he saw these gods waiting outside the temple. Sit down. Set used his divine power to create a group of physicians in the temple. The 31 gods sat down silently. They had received Set's message. They knew that Set had already marked out the location of the remaining 10% of the desert. Next, it was time to mark out the territory of each god. The more time has passed, the quieter they are, because no one wants to anger Set who abandoned 70% of the desert. Although Set looks very calm now, but who knows if there's a sandstorm that destroys everything under the calm. Set looked at the 31 gods and waited silently. He was not waiting for them to speak, or for other gods to come. He was waiting for Isis and Osiris to change the desert landscape. The loss of power would make his breath weaken and reveal a weak breath. He wanted to let these gods see him weaken with their own eyes. Then he could enter the underworld and sanctify the land of the underworld to make up for the lost desert territory. He had to put on a full show. It was impossible for him to lose so much desert territory and remain unscathed. Chapter 52 Difficulty and Beginning. Just like this, the Yellow Sand Temple was filled with a dead silence. Even when the number of gods increased from 31 to 51, the atmosphere did not change. Until the arrival of a god, the atmosphere changed. Wearing a white flower crown, wearing a white and blue linen dress, with beautiful features, it was Milan, the god of agave. Cactus god Thorns smiled. Finally, their savior has arrived. The other gods also had a look of joy. Milan stepped into the temple, smiled, and lowered his posture. Lord Set. Set held his face with one hand, raised his eyebrows, and said, "So it's the kind-hearted god of agave." "You are very late." Milan cursed Set for being petty in his heart, but still smiled on his face. "My temple is far away from here, so I am late. You can use the gate of God to come here." Set changed his hand to hold his face and said lightly. Hearing this, Milan almost laughed out of anger. God wants to go to other gods' temples through the gate of God. First, he needs to know the location. Second, he needs the consent of that god. In most cases, the gods do not allow any god to come directly through the god's gate. Therefore, Milan did not think about it at the beginning, but after receiving the letter, he obediently rushed over. "I forgot." Milan held back her breath and smiled. "I won't do it next time." Set stared at Milan. To be honest, he didn't understand. Agave can only exist in the desert. As a god embodied by agave, why did Milan want to annoy him? He asked them to negotiate with Shu and delay time. It was no problem to be persuaded by a few words. Set would at most call them stupid. However, Milan volunteered to write a letter to him about their behavior. It was obvious that they were trying to please Shu and annoy him, but Shu was not a desert god. "I don't understand. I don't understand. Merlin was stared at, and Seth didn't say anything. She became nervous. She was afraid that Seth would suddenly attack her and seriously injure her. So, Merlin hesitated for a moment and said, Lord Seth? Yeah, Seth responded lazily with a nasal tone. Merlin was even more angry, but he had to keep a straight face. I didn't hear what you just said, Seth said. Damn desert god. Merlin cursed in his heart, and smiled and repeated what he just said. Next time? Seth raised his eyebrows. You mean, you will be late again next time? Merlin was so angry that his teeth were almost broken. The other gods looked at him with pity. However, it was only a moment of pity, and more of it was gloating, because it was better for one god to suffer than for all of them to suffer. Merlin suppressed all his dissatisfaction and smiled. It won't happen next time. Next time? Seth raised his eyebrows. Not next time, Merlin replied with a fake smile. Next time? Seth said. Not next time. Merlin smiled. Next time? Seth held his face and looked at Merlin. It won't happen next time, Merlin repeated with a smile. Oh, not next time. Seth was too lazy to repeat this sentence. Merlin heard this and smiled and nodded. She didn't dare to say anything else, fearing that Seth would repeat it again. Seth glanced at the 51 gods who were gloating over their misfortune, and said to Merlin, the desert has shrunk in scope, and I plan to collect the monsters in the desert as well. So, kind-hearted god of tequila, please go and capture all the monsters in the desert in one place. Remember to go somewhere within the scope I have designated. Merlin was stunned, and then she thought Seth was crazy. What's the point of collecting a group of monsters? Just leave them where they are. Of course, she didn't dare to say this directly, so she just said, Lord Seth, there is no god of monsters. Those monsters have no reason at all, and their flesh and blood cannot be eaten by humans. It's better to kill them all. Killing is much easier than capturing them alive. Seth naturally understood Merlin's thoughts, but he had just thought of how to deal with her. The monsters in the desert are also part of the desert. I have temporarily abandoned 70% of the desert, but I don't want to abandon everything. Seth emphasized the last sentence. The 51 gods immediately restrained their expressions. Merlin also knew that this matter could not be avoided, and in order not to give Seth an excuse to get angry, she said, Lord Seth, I was wrong. I will catch the monsters in one place later. Seth looked at Merlin coldly. Go now. Merlin was stunned and hurriedly said, Lord Seth, aren't you going to redivide the territory? Driving her away at this time, do you want her to die? There are still gods who have not arrived, and the territory will not be demarcated for the time being, Seth said. Merlin breathed a sigh of relief, and then became angry. There are still gods who have not arrived, so how could she be late just now? However, Merlin understood and could not resist. I will do it now. Merlin accepted his fate. Then, the god of Agave left the temple. Seth glanced at the god sitting in the temple. He could not disobey Ra's oracle. It did not mean that he could tolerate these other gods getting angry. The 51 gods did not look at Seth. The desert temple fell into a dead silence again. The border between the desert and the oasis. Isis and Osiris stood in midair. They had received Seth's letter. Osiris looked at the unhappy Isis and comforted her. We should try to slow down. Seth won't be seriously injured. Yes. Isis nodded helplessly. Then, the two took out the Ankh. Osiris converted all the power of the triple authority into plant power. The grass and wildflowers on the plains felt this power and grew wildly. Isis approached Osiris and also converted all her power into life power. The grass and wildflowers grew even more wildly and luxuriantly. Seeing this, Osiris guided his power to approach Isis. Isis did not resist and accepted Osiris's power. The plant power and life power merged perfectly. The grass and wildflowers on the plains grew wildly as far as the eye could see, but they never dared to cross the boundary between the desert and the plain. Osiris and Isis looked at each other and flew towards the desert. The grass and wildflowers slowly covered the desert. Then, nothing happened. The aura of killing green plants in the desert did not appear. The plants accelerated the speed of covering the desert. The bare desert disappeared visibly. The gods who depended on the desert had already moved their power away from the border in advance. In the Yellow Sand Temple, the original 51 gods, plus the 20 gods who came later, suddenly looked at Set. Set, who was sitting on the throne with his face in his hands and closing his eyes to rest, suddenly weakened. It was the desert territory that was being flattened. These gods realized this. Seth felt the piercing pain at this moment, and he felt that he was losing power all the time. But he felt the sight of the gods, suppressing the pain. Seth opened his eyes expressionlessly. The aura of war and power burst out. The powerful divine power wiped out the entire temple in an instant. Only the throne and the position of the gods remained. The gods present quickly lowered their heads and dared not look directly at Set again. Chapter 53 Visit. Set took out a piece of papyrus and threw it to the god sitting on the far right. It is the division of your respective positions. You will inform the gods who have not yet arrived. Tell her about Malin's territory in 10 days. Okay, go and move the authority itself. This sentence was the most beautiful to the 71 gods. Yes, Lord Set. They hurriedly agreed in unison. Then they left the yellow sand temple without looking back. Set sat on the throne with a frown. The power was rapidly fading, making him irritable and angry. If these gods were not allowed to leave, Set felt that he might lose control and attack them. Losing authority would make the gods crazy. Trying his best to suppress his strange feelings, Set stood up and took out the ankh, injected divine power into it and opened the door of God leading to another temple. A moment later, the door of God constructed by divine power opened. Set stepped into it without hesitation. Arriving at another temple, Set immediately took out the golden feather from the statue in the temple. After the meeting of the gods, Set unsealed the golden feather. He placed it in another temple to absorb the power of faith. As a human god, it was easy for him to manipulate the power of faith to fall on that temple. He mobilized the power to reseal the golden feather. In an instant, all the power of faith that fell on the statue fell on Set. The gentle blank power merged into the power of the gods. It relieved some of Set's chaotic thoughts and pain due to the loss of power. Set hung the ankh outside the temple and sealed the entire temple. Then he sat on the throne and quietly accepted the power of faith. 6 solar hours later, Set opened his eyes. Has the power stopped flowing? It should be that Isis and Osiris stopped flattening the desert. Set stood up, unsealed the golden feather again, and placed it in the statue. Then he opened the door of the gods and returned to the original temple. With Isis's character, she will definitely come to visit him, so he has to come back to avoid Isis from not being able to find him and worrying about his situation. Thinking of this, Set mobilized the power of the gods. The surrounding yellow sand condensed into neatly cut bricks and columns, and the temple framework was built in an orderly manner. At the same time, the painted murals on the temple walls were also reappearing rapidly. In a few breaths, the temple was rebuilt. Set still felt uncomfortable, and the breath on his body was still filled with the breath of decay. He walked to the throne and sat down, closing his eyes and thinking about what to do next. The most important thing at present is to turn the underworld into sand. After that, it is to revive the power of destiny. This is not a matter of 1 or 2 days. It will take a long time and must be done secretly. In addition to these 2 things, Set thought of the predetermined fate. If you want to get rid of the predetermined fate, you must use the power of destiny. This requires reviving the power of destiny first. Therefore, it is not considered for the time being. After determining what to do next, Set took a short rest on the throne. On the top of the mountain, outside the Sky Temple, Nut chatted with Meets. The feeling of happiness filled Nut's heart. Therefore, she also wanted the stars to be transformed into human appearance. At this time, a door of God was drawn. Then, Keb walked out of the gate of God. Seeing Keb, Nut asked, has the goose feather still not absorbed enough power of faith? Yes. Keb nodded, a little worried. If a god absorbs enough power of faith from the golden feather given by Ra, it is necessary to exchange it for a new golden feather. At that time, we must also hand over the golden feather that has absorbed full power of faith. So, Nut, stop absorbing the goose feather for the time being. Nut knew that what Keb said was right. However, because of Meets, Nut could not make a decision immediately. However, soon Nut and Keb laughed with relief, because Meets told them that it was right to temporarily stop the goose feather from absorbing the blank power of faith. If their secret was noticed by some mind because of such a small matter, even by Ra, It would be a nightmare. Meets is right. Stop for the time being. Nut smiled with relief. Keb looked at Nut affectionately, and then looked at the stars under the sky, feeling very happy. In the yellow sand temple, Seth felt the fluctuation of divine power. When he opened his eyes, he saw divine patterns drawn in the temple. They were the divine patterns of the gate of God, and the divine power was from Isis and Osiris. Seth agreed that they wanted to come through the gate of God. If it was other gods, Seth would immediately stop the divine patterns of the gate of God from being drawn. Not long after, the gate of God opened. Isis and Osiris walked out of the door. They saw Seth with a weakened breath at a glance. "Little brother, how do you feel?" Isis walked quickly to Seth, her face full of worry. At the same time, the divine power filled with the breath of life was continuously attached to Seth's body by Isis. Seth smiled helplessly and said, "Sister, I'm not injured. The treatment of life breath is useless to me." Osiris came over and asked Seth seriously, "Seth, do you feel that you are about to be seriously injured? If so, we will suspend the change of desert landforms for 10 years. Seth was grateful for the concern of Isis and Osiris. "It's okay, it's just that the breath is weakening. There is no sign of injury. Besides, if I suspend it for 10 years, I will have to endure 10 years of torture. It's better to end it as soon as possible, and then wait for me to adapt slowly." Sister and brother, you also need to adapt to the surge in strength. Isis didn't hear any complaints or resentment in Seth's words. She was completely relieved, although they all knew that this matter was based on the oracle of the god Ra, and it had already been brought to the gods' meeting, and there was no way to change the decision to change the desert. However, Isis and Osiris were indeed the biggest beneficiaries. So, even though they knew that Seth would not complain, envy, or hate them, he would not be angry with them or say bad words. However, he felt guilty after all, as if he had taken away his brother's power. Seth was keenly aware of Isis's guilt and comforted her. "Don't worry, sister, I am still the god of the desert. I just temporarily abandoned 70% of the desert." Isis nodded and smiled. "Brother, I won't let you suffer. Sister will make you strong again." At this, Seth just smiled. He thought that Isis was comforting him. After all, if you want to be a powerful god, you must have an increase in authority or a new authority. However, Ra refused to give him new authority at the gods' council. The reason was that he was afraid that if he got new authority when he was damaged in the desert, it would impact his damaged true name. This was most likely an excuse, but it also blocked Seth's possibility of getting new authority from Ra. Isis was not the sun god, so naturally she could not give him new authority. He could not become strong again. Chapter 54, Second Coming. Besides, Seth didn't need Isis to do anything. He only needed to enter the underworld once, and the lost desert would be restored. However, he was happy for Isis's sincere comfort and said, "Thank you, sister." Osiris smiled silently on the side and didn't mention the matter of postponing the change of the desert landform. They chatted with Seth for several sun hours. Seth pretended to show a tired look inadvertently. Isis comforted Seth with the power of life distressedly, and said, "Little brother, you should rest first." Well, Seth didn't refuse. Then, Isis left a breath of life. Osiris left 2 golden fruits and left through the gate of God. Wait for the divine pattern of the gate of God to dissipate. Seth sat on the throne and waited quietly. At this moment, Seth didn't show any fatigue. In fact, the fatigue just now was pretended. There was no way. The sun had already set for half of the west. Ra was about to come back from the underworld, inspect the earth, and then fight with Apep. He needed to seize the opportunity and re-enter the underworld. However, thinking of this, Seth thought of one thing. There is still 1 month left, and this solar year will be over. Next year, it will be his turn to assist Ra in killing Apep. Originally, Seth did not want to face Apep. Now that he has a perfect excuse for the loss of power, he does not want to face Apep even more, although he is very sorry to the god who replaced him. However, gods do not like to work. If they can slack off openly, they should slack off. No, he is not slacking off. He is a patient whose real name is damaged and needs to be cultivated. Seth quickly wrote a letter to Shu to inform him of this. Watching the yellow sand bird fly away, Set was in a good mood. Swamp under the setting sun. Best walked on the swamp. Her ankh was suspended under her neck. At first glance, it looked like a house cat with a copper belt tied on it. The creatures in the swamp could sense Best's breath and avoided this god. Some lower gods sensed Best's breath and were curious about why Best came suddenly. The swamp god, poisonous insect god and other gods wanted to come over and say hello to Best. The cat god Best only likes to play tricks on humans, and has a good relationship with the gods. However, Best exudes a cold aura. This shows that she doesn't want to be disturbed, so the gods didn't approach her. But they were also curious about why Best ran to the swamp. Normally, Best she'd play tricks on people in the desert. Then the swamp god thought of the latest news circulating among the gods and said, "You've all heard about it, right?" The desert god said was so angry because the desert was changed that he almost killed all the lower gods who depended on the desert. If he hadn't taken care of Ra, maybe the gods who depended on the desert would have really died in his hands. "Of course I heard about it." Strange tree god said, "This matter has been a hot topic. Everyone advised those gods to go to shoot to Set, but they are afraid of being targeted by Set, so they don't dare." Speaking of which, I heard from Yellow Willow god that the fiery flower god told her that the red flower god told the fiery flower god that the agave god was targeted miserably. The magic night flower god said mysteriously, "How miserable is it?" Several gods asked in unison. He was forced to do hard labor by Set. The magic night flower god sympathized. He said that if you don't do it or don't do it well, you will be beaten up. It must be because of this incident that Best didn't go to the desert to play. "I'm afraid of being targeted by Set. Too miserable." Several gods said in unison. Then they began to denounce Set verbally. Whether the words were true or false was none of their business. Best didn't know that the gods behind were gossiping and spreading rumors. She walked along the swamp to a plain covered by thick fog. Looking at the plain covered by thick fog, Best's golden pupils showed sadness. However, she did not walk into the thick fog, but squatted there and waited. Not long after, the sun completely set in the west. The darkness fell, which also meant the night was coming. A bright moon appeared in the sky, followed by the twinkling stars. Best stood up and watched the thick fog quickly melt under the moonlight. Not long after, a plain planted with silver shining moonlight grass appeared in front of her. But Best did not walk into the plain immediately. The breath of protection surged from her body. Then she slowly faded from the appearance of a black cat and turned into a human, wearing a black cat-shaped crown, wearing a black and white linen dress. Her facial features were as wild and agile as a cat. Around his neck was a cat-shaped wedge made of golden obsidian, moonstone, lapis lazuli, black gemstone, and gold. On his wrists, arms, and ankles, he wore gold rings engraved with the divine pattern of the moon. Best walked slowly into the plain in human form. The edge of the desert. Set used the power of faith to cover up his existence. Then he waited for time to pass. Only when the moon rose and two suns rose did Set go to the Styx. The Styx was full of dead spirits as always. After entering the underworld, Set looked at the land of the underworld, which was almost all golden flowing water and reeds. He felt very, very sorry. Such a huge power of faith belongs exclusively to Hades. Unless he becomes Hades, he cannot get it. However, it seems not impossible for him to weave his own destiny and seek the power of Hades. After his thoughts were scattered for a moment, Set gathered his thoughts and quickly went to the place where he buried the young dead. At that time, he was afraid that the young dead would expose his secret. He was also afraid that Ra would find him, so he sealed him with fate. However, he is not worried now. The power of fate is enough to conceal his existence. In addition, Set promised to protect his family, helping him find the reed marsh. The boy is entitled to be rewarded. Arriving at the place in his memory, Set dug the boy out. He also removed the thread of fate from his body. The boy, who was originally sleeping, opened his eyes and looked at Set in confusion and fear. His memory still stayed when he was tied up by Set, and Set absorbed the removed thread. He has not yet woven his own power of fate. The power of fate left by Amon needs to devour a person's live memories to maintain its own existence. After being merged by Set, although it does not need to devour a person's live memories to maintain itself, however, A person's tortuous life can improve the power of fate little by little. After digesting the spider silk, Seth looked at the boy's undead and asked, "What's your name?" "Nano." The boy replied with some fear. Seth wrote down the name and asked, "Where is your home and who are your relatives?" "My family lives in Asukara," the undead boy answered in detail. "My relatives include my mother and my younger brother. I will protect them and let them live a carefree life." Seth repeated his promise again. "Thank you," the undead boy thanked excitedly. Seth ignored Nano and took out the Ankh to mobilize the damaged desert authority. The divine power of the desert was everywhere. He threw the Ankh into the golden water under his feet. In an instant, the mud in the golden water turned into yellow sand. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We are waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 55 Moon Temple. The yellow sand quickly transformed into soil. The golden water looked like pure gold against the golden yellow sand. Seth released his divine power without reservation, accelerating the transformation of the underworld. He could feel that the lost power was being replenished bit by bit. Negative emotions such as pain and anger were quickly calming down. Nano watched this magical scene from the side. At this moment, he understood that the handsome man in front of him was not some strange and powerful undead. He was a god. Only gods can change the world and turn the earth into a desert. The plain where plants shining with silver light were planted. Best stopped and looked at the temple standing on the plain. Stone bricks, stone pillars, and columns engraved with the moon god pattern built a magnificent temple. The plants shining with silver light stretched out vines, entwined them, and bloomed white flowers to embellish them. After standing for a while, Bess touched the Ankh on her neck. A ball of blood-colored water rushed out, and there was a papyrus book in the water. The book saw the temple and said, "Is this the night plane where Kongzu slept?" "Yes." Best's eyes showed nostalgia. He liked the moonflowers growing on this plane very much. The book in the blood-colored water did not continue the topic, but said, "I have never recovered to my peak, so I can't let you remember Kongzu's real name through me. You can only use Kongzu's moon power temporarily through me. The time is only half a solar hour." "I understand. You have said it more than once," Best replied seriously. The Book of True Names said nothing more, but the water wrapped around it squirmed. The papyrus book seemed to be turned page by an invisible hand. Finally, it stopped on a slightly wrinkled page. On the page, hundreds of names were recorded. One of the names was flashing at this moment. Best used her divine power to hold the Book of True Names wrapped in blood-colored water in front of her. Then she immersed her whole face in the blood-colored water. In an instant, Best's eyes were only that flashing name. After a moment, Best moved the bloody water and the Book of True Name in it away. A name was engraved in her golden pupils. At the same time, Best felt that all the divine power in her body was transformed into the power of the moon. Realizing that she had briefly possessed the power of the moon goddess, Best grabbed the Book of True Name, covered herself in the Book of True Name with the power of the moonlight, and rushed to the entrance of the temple. As Best approached at a high speed, the entire temple burst out with a powerful silver-white power. A full moon appeared above the temple. The cold and dead atmosphere permeated, instantly wiping out the moonlight grass and moonlight flowers above the temple and within 100 miles of the temple. Seeing this, Best was not afraid, but happy. Being able to burst out such a powerful force means that Kongzu is in good condition. He may even wake up. The moonlight power swept over Best, but did not attack. At this moment, Best rushed to the stone door and stretched out her hand to try to push it open. With the blessing of the moonlight power, the stone door was easily pushed open. In the past, even if Best resisted the attack of the moonlight, she could not push open the stone door with the power of the moon. Suppressing her inner ecstasy, Best rushed into the temple. The stone door closed, and Best only felt the dark scene in front of her. It was the power of the night that could make the gods invisible. Best immediately thought that it was the power of the night. Best raised her hand, and a full moon emerged. The cold moonlight illuminated Best's surroundings, but it could not illuminate the entire temple. This made Best feel uneasy. As she flew forward, she shouted loudly, "Brother Kongzu! Brother Kongzu, wake up!" The voice echoed in the temple, but there was no response. Best's uneasiness became stronger and stronger. Suddenly, in an area illuminated by the moonlight, Best saw a broken flail. She quickly went over to pick up the broken flail. The part of the flail made of platinum was engraved with the moon god pattern. It's Brother Kongzu's flail. Best was shocked. She couldn't help being shocked. The power of the moon was extremely powerful. Kongzu could even fight against Apep's 5 sons. But Kongzu's flail was broken in the temple. There are traces of fighting on the right. On the right, the Book of the True Name suddenly spoke. Best hurriedly looked over, but the darkness around was too thick, so Best had to walk over. Only then did she see the traces mentioned in the Book of the True Name. The stone bricks engraved with the moon divine pattern were broken, the stone pillars collapsed, and the murals were also erased. Best used divine power to sense this place, wanting to get some clues. However, she didn't sense anything. Time was limited, so Best didn't try to sense it again, but put away the broken flail and rushed to the depths of the temple. She must find Kongzu as soon as possible. However, the deeper into the temple, the thicker the breath of the night. The light emitted by the moon divine power was quickly swallowed up. Best had to mobilize more divine power to maintain the full moon that illuminated the surroundings. At the same time, she also saw more traces of fighting. This made her more and more uneasy. Suddenly, Best stopped. There is danger ahead, God's intuition told Best. However, it was pitch black ahead, and she couldn't see or sense anything. Best looked around, and there was only this one way. Taking a deep breath, Best mobilized the moonlight power to condense into a ball of light. Then she manipulated the ball of light to float forward. The passage covered by the night was illuminated by the moonlight. Apart from the traces of the battle that almost destroyed the passage, Best didn't see anything. The existence that made her feel dangerous didn't seem to exist. Suddenly, the ball of light collapsed. The illuminated passage fell into darkness again. Before Best could react, a red sun appeared in the passage. Its appearance stimulated the darkness covering the passage. They rushed towards the red sun frantically, wanting to devour it. "Go, it's the power of Ra," the Book of the True Name shouted, and the childish voice was full of fear. Best mobilized the power and retreated quickly. However, the red sun was in front of Best in the blink of an eye. The next moment, the blazing heat that seemed to melt everything burst out. The full moon transformed by the moonlight power collapsed, and Best turned the 3 divine powers to protect herself and the Book of True Name. The blood-colored water that wrapped the Book of True Name also separated a little and turned into a layer of water curtain. However, it was in vain. Best's divine body cracked, and her breath was declining and crashed into the wall of the temple. The Book of True Name was only wrapped in a thin layer of water, and it was knocked away with Best and fell to the ground without moving. The red sun rushed to Best again, and the powerful force burst out again. The seriously injured Best was unharmed. Best looked at the full moon protecting her and smiled, but tears flowed unconsciously. "Brother Kongzu, let's go." A cold male voice and a moonlight power came from the full moon. The power of the moonlight wrapped Best, wanting to send her out of the temple. Best did not obey immediately, but grabbed the ankh and inserted it into the blood-colored water curtain that wrapped the Book of True Name. Chapter 56 Preparation. The Book of True Names had never expected Best to backstab it. The only blood-colored water that protected it was easily pierced by Best's ankh. The bronze ankh pierced the pages of the Book of True Names, and the pure divine power quickly sealed the Book of True Names. The next moment, the blood-colored water flowed back into the Book of True Names. "Why?" the Book of True Names asked unwillingly. Best did not answer, picked up the Book of True Names, and threw it towards the dim full moon. The full moon separated a ray of moonlight, covering the Book of True Names. The Book of True Names tried to break free, but countless divine patterns appeared on the surface of its pages, limiting its power. At the same time, a silver flame ignited on the Book of True Names. "Ah!" the Book of True Names wailed. But it could not stop itself from burning. But in the blink of an eye, the Book of True Names turned into ashes. But in the ashes, A drop of golden blood that exuded the breath of the sun was taken out by the moonlight and sent back to the full moon. In an instant, the full moon was no longer dim, and it was shining brightly. The red sun exploded with even more powerful power. It was still overwhelming the full moon. Seeing this, Best was extremely worried. She tried to protect the full moon with her seriously injured body. However, the full moon suddenly gave off the breath of the blazing sun. It seemed that in an instant, the full moon turned into a sun, emitting light and heat. The red sun gradually calmed down its violent power. The full moon once again separated the divine power, wrapped Best, and wanted to send her out. Best did not refuse this time. She was a burden if she stayed here. What's more, Khonsu was still alive and got the blood of the sun she had sought. The moonlight sent Best out of the temple. Best looked at the moon temple that had returned to its dead silence and smiled with satisfaction. Everything will be fine. And it will definitely be as she wished. The underworld. Seth was still frantically transforming the scorched earth of the underworld. The lost desert territory has been fully recovered, even more than the desert territory he had before. The powerful feeling filled his body, making him laugh. And this is only a part of the existing scorched earth of the underworld that has been sanctified. But the time is almost up. Seth manifested the power of fate, and countless spider silks stretched out and spread from Seth's hands. Then they were entangled in the golden water and reeds. The prayers of countless people reached Seth's ears. There were men and women, old and young in these prayers. Without exception, they all prayed devoutly, begging the underworld not to take their lives. Relatives, wealth, reputation, hatred and other factors made them unwilling to die. If it were other gods, the moment they heard these prayers, they would be polluted by the blank power of faith. But Seth would not. Because he has the authority of man, fate and man, two powers superimposed, Seth felt that he was connected with the people who prayed to form the golden reeds. Cover the desertified land. Seth attached his thoughts to everyone through spider silk. The next moment, the prayer that prayed to the underworld to let him live turned into a prayer to cover the desertified land. White reeds swayed, golden water rippled, and ripples spread far away. The originally golden yellow sand turned into the scorched earth of the underworld in an instant after the ripples passed. Not long after, the land of the underworld that had been sanded by Seth turned into the scorched earth of the underworld again. After confirming that the cover was completed, Seth retracted the spider silk. After doing this, Seth wiped off the breath of him on Nano and left. As for Nano, he watched Seth leave and felt lonely. Seth didn't know what Nano was thinking. However, even if he knew, he couldn't do anything. The other party was a dead soul, and he couldn't give him anything. As for loneliness, the broken fate merged with him, and the dead soul would no longer fall into endless memories. Therefore, the dead souls on the land of the underworld should gather together soon. They may form gangs and tribes. Seth thought about this problem and thought of a way to deal with it. However, before dealing with the dead souls, he had more important things to do. Leave the underworld, quickly cross the Styx, and return to the Yellow Sand Temple. Seth summoned 3 giant yellow sand birds. Go and search for ores filled with the breath of the desert. Yes, Master. The 3 giant yellow sand birds responded in unison. After sending the giant yellow sand birds, Seth changed to a comfortable posture and sat on the throne. Then he quickly imagined the appearance of weakening breath and weakening power. After doing this, Seth closed his eyes and rested. At the edge of the swamp, Nephthys sat by the flower window of the temple, looking at the horizon. There was a bright light there. It was the light of the sun. You are so leisurely. A man's voice suddenly came from the shadows in the temple. Nephthys said without turning her head, "You died again, Humphrey." The voice in the shadow snorted coldly and changed the subject. "You haven't found a god to replace Set yet?" "I can't find a replacement." Hearing this, Nephthys' eyes were full of anger. The main god rank suppresses the upper gods and lower gods too much. It's impossible to expect them to kill Brother Osiris out of jealousy, especially after Brother Osiris's power has become stronger. Those with the same main god rank have already concluded marriages. The voice in the shadow was silent for a moment, and said, "I can help you bewitch the upper gods. Let them listen to you. Even if you have to kill Osiris, Do it. Will it be noticed by other gods? Nephthys turned her head and looked at the shadow. No, the voice in the shadow answered decisively. It's just a higher god. Hearing this, Nephthys breathed a sigh of relief and smiled. After 8 solar days, do something for me, the voice in the shadow said. What is it? Nephthys asked. A curved palm-sized tusk rolled from the shadows to the window. Nephthys picked up the tusk and looked into the shadows. Take it and go to the end of the Nile in the daytime. 8 solar days later, the voice in the shadow said, you will meet a nasty guy. Give the tusk to him and let him act as soon as possible. If he asks about the underworld, tell him that the underworld has been partially eroded. Hearing this, Nephthys frowned. The underworld has been eroded. You didn't tell me about this, because it's a lie. The voice in the shadow said coldly, if you don't say that, that nasty guy won't act. You can rest assured that the underworld will eventually belong to Osiris. The contract we made stipulates that we cannot lie to each other. So, believe me, Nephthys. Nephthys put away the tusk and nodded. I believe in the contract. I will pass on the matter. The god who will replace Seth has also been chosen. I will need you to help me seduce him then. Naturally, the voice in the shadow replied. Chapter 57, Gift from the Desert God. In the Yellow Sand Temple, Seth dispersed Shu's power. Shu had just sent a letter to Seth, telling him that his shift had been cancelled. He also asked about his condition and whether he was seriously injured. If he needed help, he could go to him. Seth raised his hand and replied, I know, and thanked him. The sacred script condensed into a palm-sized yellow sand bird, which flew out of the temple. After dealing with this matter, Seth felt a heart-piercing pain and the tearing pain of losing power quickly. Today's desert flattening began. Seth gritted his teeth and endured the pain, and summoned 3 more servants. Go to these places to find the location of Bird Plain. Seth had not forgotten what he had promised to the undead Nano. In addition, he had digested the thread of fate that bound Nano and glimpsed his memory. He knew the location of Bird Plain and the appearance of his relatives. However, he was just a teenager and had not been out too far. He only remembered that there were flocks of red birds living in Bird Plain. With this information alone, Seth could not determine the specific location of the vast land. However, there are several guesses about the approximate locations. After all, complex terrain such as plains, forests, swamps, and salt lakes together occupy 20% of the land. If it is divided equally into one type of terrain, it does not occupy a high share. After doing this, Seth waited for the servants to come back. Watergrass oasis. Damses stood in front of a bronze mirror cast with a fusion of copper and tin. The boy in the mirror looked only 13 years old, and his underdeveloped body had a boyish thinness. But Damses knew that this was just an appearance. Since praying to the Lord of the Desert for the dead high priest, his strength had skyrocketed overnight. In order to verify that it was not his illusion, he just secretly fought with the tribal warrior leader. The result was that he crushed the tribal warrior leader in all aspects. Faced with this result, the warrior leader knelt down excitedly and said in awe, Master Priest, you are indeed blessed by the great god of desert. You are far superior to me in both strength and combat awareness. Even the first warrior of the tribe cannot compare with you. Especially, you are still so young. Damses stared at the tribal warrior and confirmed that he was not lying before letting him leave and not to spread the news. Yes, the warrior leader nodded vigorously and left Damses' residence. Is it given to me by the great god? Damses said to himself. But after a moment, Damses was firm in his thoughts. This is the gift of God, the gift of the great god of desert, and he is the priest of the chosen god. And it is normal to be given strength and war talents. Even the Lord of Desert God gave him these talents as a reward for him to purge the oasis that did not believe in Lord of Desert God. Yes, it must be like this. After thinking it through, Damses smiled. Master Priest. Suddenly, someone shouted outside. Hearing the voice, Damses put away his smile and said, Come in. A man wearing a black linen hat walked in with a sad face and said, Priest, the chieftain has passed away. Hearing this news, Damses frowned and said, What's the reason? He died in his sleep. The man replied. Damses shook his head and said, Let the tribal doctor check it out. The chieftain is only 40 years old, strong, and also practices plant magic. Such a person will not die in his sleep. Yes, the man also became alert. However, he did not leave immediately, but mentioned another thing. Priest, the chieftain only left 2 daughters, the eldest daughter Mansi, the youngest daughter Bola. One of them is 8 years old and the other is 4 years old. They are girls and cannot inherit the position of chieftain. Please choose a new chieftain to stabilize the people's hearts. Damses nodded and said, I already have a candidate in mind. The man left with peace of mind. Yellow Sand Temple. Seth looked at the 10 huge ores neatly placed in front of him. Lapis lazuli, amethyst, obsidian, gold, silver, brass, tin, citrine, hematite, malachite. The type is not the key. The key is that they are exposed to the wind and sun in the desert, but they are still not destroyed. Instead, they are filled with the breath of the desert. This kind of ore is what Seth needs. He wants to create a divine artifact that can contain his power, then place this artifact in the underworld, in order to keep the scorched earth of the underworld that has been transformed into a desert intact. After all, it has been verified before. The desertification that has lost his power will be gradually assimilated back to the scorched earth of the underworld by the dead air of the underworld, although it will not restore his desertified land to its original state in one day. However, the more land he desertifies, the more land is eroded back to the scorched earth of the underworld by the breath of the underworld. That is equivalent to him having to experience the pain of losing his authority every day in the future. Considering this, Seth plans to create a divine artifact. With the huge power of faith covering it, the artifact will not be discovered. Thinking of this, Seth raised his hand and took out the ankh. He collected 10 pieces of ore filled with the smell of the desert. Then a golden flame burned on the ankh. After a while, a wisp of black ash fell from the ankh. It was the impurities in the ore. Seth held his face with his hands, waiting for the ore to become pure. The edge of the desert. The people of an oasis, now all kneeled at the edge of the oasis, because just now, they witnessed a miracle. When 2 gods, a man and a woman, flew over and stayed at the edge of the oasis, the barren desert was instantly covered with green plants and flowers. The fresh breath of the plain enveloped them. People realized that their oasis had become a plain. They knelt down to worship this miracle, and countless powers of faith were born. Isis and Osiris and the air isolated the falling powers of faith. The oasis of prayer did not receive their response, nor did they have their temple. Therefore, these powers of faith will collapse after being isolated. Let's stop here today, Isis said to Osiris. Osiris looked at the oasis below and said, do you want to accept their faith? The golden feather given by Ra is still not full. Isis looked over the oasis and confirmed that there was no temple in the oasis, so she said, okay. Osiris landed. The people in the oasis became more fanatical, but they were also in awe of God. I am the god of agriculture. Osiris smiled kindly. The one above is my wife, and she is the god of life. From today on, you are no longer an oasis in the desert. We will protect you. Do you want to believe in us? Believe, the tribe leader answered hoarsely. The people of the tribe shouted in unison, God of agriculture, God of life. Osiris raised his hand and pointed at the center of the tribe. A temple built entirely of giant trees and flowers rose from the ground. Inside was the statue of him and Isis. Chapter 58 Faith and Weaving. In the yellow sand temple, Seth dispersed the golden flames burning on the ankh. The ankh spat out a ball of golden liquid filled with the smell of yellow sand. This was the essence of the ore left after the 10 kinds of ores were refined. Wrap the essence of the ore with divine power and place it in front of him. Seth used divine power to cut his palm, and blood containing powerful power flowed out. After taking 10 drops, Seth used divine power to heal the wound. At the same time, he added the blood of God to the essence of the ore. After being fused with the blood of God, the liquid essence of the ore slowly solidified. Seth stretched out his hand and pinched the essence of the ore into the shape of a scepter. Then he engraved dense desert divine patterns on the scepter. This process lasted for 2 suns, making Seth feel a little tired. After a short rest, Seth injected desert divine power into the scepter. The desert divine pattern slowly lit up, and the scepter had a hint of divine breath. Sensing the breath, Seth nodded with satisfaction, and then put the scepter away. At this time, Set noticed that the sense of loss of power and authority stopped. It should be that Isis and Osiris stopped changing the desert landscape. Set considered whether to tell Isis and Osiris that they no longer needed a relaxation period starting from tomorrow. They could change all the deserts that were divided into plains in one go. However, after thinking about it, he decided not to. It was obvious that he had a problem when he made this request. After giving up this unreliable idea, Set began to weave the spider web of fate. Then he used the spider web as the main force and the blank power of faith as the auxiliary force to create his own authority of fate. According to the memory he obtained by integrating the broken authority of fate, Amon wove the spider web of fate based on his own life memories. He chose another 36 people and condensed 37 spider threads of fate with his and their lives. Then he used the power of man-god to collect the faith of 10 million people as adhesive. Finally, he constructed the prototype of a spider web of fate. In this weaving process, Amon failed countless times and it took 1,000 years to succeed. In fact, that time was not considered a success, because he used the web of fate to forge a broken power of fate. If it is truly successful, the power of fate that is condensed is complete. Unfortunately, Amon did not have the opportunity to try again. After the broken fate was formed, he also faced the punishment of the sun god Ra because of his predetermined fate. Set could not verify whether Amon's method could weave a complete fate. However, what Set needs is the fate he weaves himself. Even if it is broken, it doesn't matter. After all, the broken power of fate can grow little by little. After a long breath, Set suddenly realized the problem. Amon weaves fate based on his own life. In the end, he gets the power of fate that belongs to him. Then if he wants to get the power of his own fate, he must also take his life as the basis. However, before Amon became the god of man, he was a pure and complete person. But, is he a human being? Set couldn't help asking himself this question. The conclusion is that he doesn't know. It seems that I can only give it a try. Set sighed. Just when Set was about to try to condense the spider silk of fate based on himself, divine patterns were drawn in the temple. The patterns contained the aura of Isis and Osiris. Set immediately put away the ankh, wiped out the aura of the forged artifact, and fabricated a weak appearance with power lost and aura weakened. After fabricating, Set finally reacted. It seemed that he didn't need to fabricate a loss of power, because the territory recovered in the underworld was far less than the desert that Isis and Osiris had flattened in 2 days. He was really weak. However, before Set could correct himself, the gate of God opened. Isis and Osiris walked out. The aura of the two was unconcealable and skyrocketed, forming a sharp contrast with Set. "Brother, how do you feel about your divine body?" Isis walked to Set and asked worriedly. Set smiled and comforted Isis. "It's okay, just a little weak." The authority of the desert is quickly adapting to the shrinking desert territory. "That's good." Isis breathed a sigh of relief and reminded, "Little brother, if you feel uncomfortable, write a letter, or let the servants say, we will suspend the change of the desert." "Yes." Set nodded. Osiris on the side suddenly said, "There are some signs of suing your god in front of Ra." Hearing this, Set looked at Osiris and asked hurriedly, "Who is it?" "Speak behind the back." Set felt that the other party needed to taste what the desert god's revenge was. Isis comforted Set and said, "There is just some progress. There is a lower god, you should remember, the promise of the mountain scarf flower god, the god who gave birth to the most sons of gods." Set really had a deep impression of this god. The gods obeyed Ra's oracle, left the city of Heliopolis, and built their own temples on the earth. Most of the gods, after building the temple, choose to give birth to offspring with gods, humans, non-humans, and all other creatures. That is, the children of gods, sons of gods. Most gods will not give birth to too many sons of gods. After all, they are their own offspring. The death of a son of gods with a lifespan of only 300 years will make the gods feel sad. The mountain scarf flower goddess is different. She is happy to give birth to offspring. The god of wisdom recorded 1,000 years ago that she had 100,000 sons of gods who were still alive at that time. This number shocked the gods. "It's her." Isis nodded and said, "One of the sons of Sano requested to cross the gate of God. He was taken to the city of Heliopolis. Before crossing the gate of God, He told Sano that a god went to find the god Ra. Then not long after, the gods received a notice of the divine meeting. Sano didn't want to say who it was. Seth frowned. Isis shook her head. Sano is not interested in what the Son of God said. Stop the Son of Gods from saying who it was, and that Son of Gods failed to cross the gate of God. Hearing this, Seth understood that the clue was broken. Don't worry, little brother. I will get to the bottom of this matter, Isis said firmly. Seth was grateful to Isis, but he knew that it would be impossible to find out which god was plotting against him. Sister, forget it if you can't find it. We will find it, Osiris interrupted, saying, Seth, no secret can be hidden forever. Osiris is right, Isis agreed. We will find him. Yeah, Seth nodded. By the way, Seth, is your hand full of the golden feather of Ra? Osiris changed the subject and asked. Seth shook his head and said half-truthfully, that golden feather seems to never be full. I estimate it will take hundreds of years to fill it up. Osiris replied, it should be easier after the human population increases. Fill it up as soon as possible so that Apep can be killed as soon as possible. I wrote this chapter for 4 hours, but it still doesn't seem right. I'll post it first and revise it later. I'll also make up a chapter and update it in the morning. I suggest you review it at noon. Sorry for the trouble. Chapter 59 Attempt. Listening to Osiris's sigh, Seth thought of the sun in the underworld. Unlike the sun on earth, the sun in the underworld is composed entirely of the power of faith. If nothing unexpected happens, that sun is the masterpiece of Ra. In the human world, every time the sun rises, when Ra patrols the earth in the sun boat, everything on the earth will be captured by him. However, Ra has not patrolled the earth for a long time. The gods living on the earth will also cover up their own traces. So, does Ra want to use the power of faith to have the same power in the underworld? Seth guessed and wondered at the same time. Isn't the power of faith poison to the sun god? Seeing Seth pondering and not speaking, Isis thought Seth was tired. So she said, little brother, we'll leave first. Well, Seth gathered his thoughts and nodded. Isis and Osiris opened the door of God and left. In an oasis near the heart of the desert, the bustling market was bustling with people, and camels carrying goods such as gems, spices, and seeds could be seen everywhere. The smell of pungent spices, fresh fruits, mellow beer, tempting barbecue, the stench of livestock, human sweat and other smells mixed together. Even in the open-air market, it was still pungent. At this time, the people outside the market were shocked and made way. Soon, everyone in the market noticed this unusual scene. They all leaned over to see what was happening. Not long after, a beautiful woman holding a gold nugget as big as a human head came over. Behind her were 2 tribal warriors of this tribe. The women in the market stared at the gold nugget as big as a human head. If they had that piece of gold, they would get rid of poverty and become nobles. The men's eyes swept back and forth between the woman and the gold nugget. They wanted to get the gold nugget and the beautiful woman. However, the 2 tribal warriors holding copper knives intimidated everyone. No robbery happened. The woman was escorted to an open space in the center of the market. She raised the gold nugget as big as a human head above her head, tears in her eyes, and said loudly, "My husband is missing in the depths of the desert. Whoever can find my missing husband will get this gold nugget as a reward." "What if your husband is dead?" A man in the crowd looked the woman up and down and asked. "The body is also fine." The woman replied with a sad face, "Bring the body back, and I will give the gold nugget to the person who brings it back. The tribe will witness and notarize it. The gold nugget will also be given to the tribe for safekeeping." After saying this, the onlookers were eager to try. At this time, the woman took out a stack of papyrus and distributed it to the onlookers. "It shows my husband's appearance and the places he went." A man with a scar on his face looked at the woman with a blatant look and said, "Don't worry, I will bring your husband back." Another sturdy man raised the papyrus in his hand and smiled kindly, "I'll be back soon." In addition to the men, there were also women who were tempted to go together. They chose to find a caravan blessed by the gods and wanted to hire them. There are countless monsters in the desert that will attack and kill humans. The statue of the god can make the monsters dare not attack. However, several caravans refused the women. A caravan leader who was more easy to talk to said the reason for the refusal. First, The reward was too little, unless they shared 2/3 of the gold nugget as big as a human head. Second, the monsters in the desert seemed to have disappeared. Disappeared? The leading woman asked in disbelief. The number of caravans blessed by God has increased, as you know, the leader explained, but there are still many caravans that have not been blessed by God. And even if they are blessed, there is only one statue in an oasis. The money earned by a caravan is very important to the oasis. So many oases will take the risk of sending out several caravans. Try to find a safer route. In the past, not even 1 out of 100 caravans could survive. Now all 100 will not die. With more caravans and more frequent trade, we can earn more. These words made the women understand the current situation, and they thanked him and left. Yellow Sand Temple. Seth opened the gate of God and went to another temple. As soon as he walked out of the gate of God, Seth saw the empty power of faith falling on the statue like snowflakes. Then it was absorbed by the golden feathers in the chest of the statue. Osiris' words gave Seth a reminder. If Ra needed the power of faith in order to create the Son of Faith in the underworld, then he would definitely pay attention to the process of the golden feathers in the hands of the gods absorbing the power of faith. The first to bear the brunt is their main god rank. In addition, Seth showed his divine power and took the initiative to bless hundreds of oases. I am afraid that the gods who pay attention to him have noticed the faith of those oases in him. In this case, the speed at which the golden feathers in his hand are filled cannot be too late. Otherwise, Seth feels that the matter of being accused by the gods behind his back will happen again. Sighing, Seth raised his hand to build another statue. Then put the golden feather in the statue on the left. Then mobilize the power of man and divide the power of faith into two. The next moment, half of the power of faith fell on the statue with golden feathers. The other half fell on the statue without golden feathers. As a human god, he can store the power of faith. Don't worry that if you don't merge it immediately, the blank power will collapse. After doing this, Seth sat on the throne. Gather the falling blank power in his hands, and then give it a name. Paper. The next moment, the blank faith power slowly turned into a piece of white paper. This is the advantage of the blank power of faith. Because it is a blank power, it will become whatever it is given. What the power of authority is determined by authority and will not change. However, the advantage of the blank faith power can only be exerted by him as the god of man. It seems not to be the case. The sun god can also do it. After thinking for a while, Seth couldn't think of the reason and could only blame the other party for being the supreme god of creation. Putting aside this issue, Seth mobilized the power of faith and began to write his life on the faith paper. On the day when I didn't have any memory, I was born. The family that gave birth to me is the source of nightmares for the next 10 years. When I was 3 years old and had memories, I didn't realize this. As Seth wrote, he reviewed his memories of his own people. Strangely, he could write everything down calmly and objectively. After a long while, Seth wrote the last sentence. That day, I disappeared as a human being and became a god. Snap. The next moment, the paper of faith broke into a mess of faith power. This faith power was no longer blank, but exuded a chaotic atmosphere. Failed. Seth sighed. As expected, my short life as a human being cannot weave a spider silk. Chapter 60. Out of Control Sandstorm. After the failure, Seth faced two choices. One was to choose other people's lives to weave the spider silk of fate, and use this spider silk of fate that originated from others as the basis for weaving the spider web of fate. With the number of humans, if they try one by one, they will always succeed. Should we do that? After thinking for a moment, Seth rejected this idea. If he used the spider silk woven from other people's lives as the basis, then he didn't need to give up the broken authority of fate given by Amon. After all, they all used other people's spider silk of fate. The only difference was that the risk of others might be lower than Amon, but there was still a risk. In this way, there was only one choice left. Keep trying. As a human god, he could repeatedly try to make the spider silk of fate throughout his life. If he recorded the life of others to make the spider silk of fate, he would not be able to do it again if he failed once. Seth let out a long breath, calmed his mind, and wove paper again with the blank power of faith. Then he recorded his short life as a human word by word. The day I became a god. Snap. The paper of faith collapsed again, leaving a mess of faith power. Seth calmly dispersed all the power of faith and tried again. The current failure is to prepare for future success. 10 times. Failed. 100 times. Failed. 1,000 times. 10,000 times. After the 20,000th time, watching the power of faith disintegrate into chaos, Seth's eyes turned red. The desert around the temple was blown up by an invisible wind. Grains of yellow sand connected, and a sandstorm formed and spread far away. Not long after, the oasis near the temple saw the sandstorm coming from all directions. At this moment, the sun was covered by the flying yellow sand. The desert became dim, as if night had fallen. From time to time, desert wolves, camels, cacti and other things that were swept up to the sky fell. Although they fell on the yellow sand, they were still bloody. The people in the oasis were terrified and quickly hid in the house and lay down. The caravans walking in the desert gathered together and prayed madly to the statue. The caravan without the statue could only hide under the camel and pray to survive. The gods who depended on the desert took action to protect their own power. But looking at the sandstorm that covered the sky and the sunlight could not penetrate, and the whistling sound was deafening. They looked solemn. They also realized again that the main god who had lost his power was still the main god. Crazy. Seth must be crazy. The Agave god Malayan shouted loudly with fear in her eyes. However, there were no other gods around her, only the roars of the monsters she caught. Shut up, Malayan shouted angrily. The monsters were afraid of the gods and stopped. The territory that Seth allocated to Milan was the new gathering place for the monsters. This piece of land was small, just enough to accommodate the Agave, and there were 100,000 monsters. Milan did not dare to kill the monsters due to Seth's order. He could only squeeze here with the monsters and ensure that they could not run away. What annoyed Milan the most was that her Agave flowers often had urine and feces from monsters. She had endured it all. But Seth was going to stir up a sandstorm and destroy all life in the desert. Milan was angry, hateful, and afraid. Although the other gods were not as crazy as Milan, they looked at the sandstorm that seemed to destroy the world and was stirred up by the master of the desert. They couldn't help but wonder if Seth was really crazy and wanted to kill them all, and all the humans in the desert. Is he really not afraid of angering Ra? GC was puzzled. Monster gathering place. Milan raised her hand and pinched to death an eyeless snake that screamed out of fear. She no longer protected the Agave flowers, but roared angrily in the direction of the yellow sand temple. Seth, I won't let you go. I'm going to the underworld and tell Ra about your evil deeds. As soon as the voice fell, the sandstorm stopped whistling. The yellow sand fell back into the desert like rain. The clear blue sky was visible again, and the red sun was still hanging high. Milan stared at the change in a daze. If it weren't for the bloody corpses in the desert that proved Milan's memory, then Milan would really doubt that there was something wrong with her memory. Did the threat work? No. She didn't feel that Seth had merged with the desert. The other gods were also confused. They didn't have the courage to meet and ask Seth what happened. If Seth was really crazy, they would probably die in Seth's hands. Yellow Sand Temple. Seth's face was pale and his expression was ugly. It's out of control. 20,000 failures not only consumed all the power of faith that he had integrated into the divine power, even the power of faith that concealed people and destroyed the authority of fate was also consumed. This made Seth unwilling and angry. In addition, after he lost the desert territory, he was affected by negative emotions such as anger and hatred. The two were superimposed, and Seth had been wanting to destroy everything in his heart just now. Seth set off a sandstorm and killed all life, including gods. Fortunately, Seth controlled himself. Seth stood up, mobilized divine power, and sealed the temple in the yellow sand. Then he opened the door of God and returned to another temple. There should be a god coming to find him, and he didn't want other gods to see the secret of that temple. Sitting on the throne, Seth placed the ankh under the dome of the temple. The smell of the desert filled the entire temple. Now he was missing a part of the power of faith that covered the power of people and the broken destiny. To be on the safe side, he still had to cover it with the smell of the desert. After doing all this, Seth began to wonder why the 20,000 attempts ended in failure. Was there something wrong with the steps? But in the memory he got, Amon did this. Was the memory wrong? It seems that he had to use other people's lives to try. Sighing, Seth leaned back on the throne to rest. He had consumed too much energy. The upper gods and lower gods attached to the desert were communicating with each other. They wanted to choose a brave god to ask Seth if everything was okay, but no god dared to ask. If they angered Seth, who might have gone mad, the fate of the Agave god Milan would be clear. Unable to choose a brave god, they could only inform Shu, the god of order, of the incident. Of course, this time all the gods rode together to inform. All the oases that were frightened by the sandstorm were excited and happy to have survived the disaster. The same was true for the caravans walking in the desert, except for some unlucky ones who were swept into the sky by the sandstorm and fell to their death. However, those people were basically exiles expelled from various oases. After the excitement and joy, there was a large-scale sacrifice to the desert god. However, some oases had other ideas. The duck grass oasis, the oasis where they lived, was named after its appearance like a duck. Among the hundreds of oases where Seth showed his divine power and gained faith, there was the duck grass oasis. They were an oasis that believed in the desert god. However, the tribal chief of the duck grass oasis looked at the old high priest with an unbelievable look on his face. "You said that we should leave the desert and convert to the god of agriculture?" Chapter 61 Influence. The high priest, who had very little hair left and age spots on his face, nodded. The young bird Itain brought back a grass seed. It was a seed of green grass, which only grows on the plains. It stands to reason that it cannot fly to the plains. You should know that. So, what the caravans that have come to the tribe to trade recently said is true. The desert will soon change into a plain, and all tribes will no longer be confined to the oasis. The patriarch thought about it. He also knew about the caravans that sent wheat seeds given by the god of agriculture everywhere. He had also come into contact with them and found that they were all devout believers of the god of agriculture. Not only did he think so, but the oases that often traded with them also thought so. With the words of the high priest, the patriarch was a little shaken. The desert provides a natural shelter for the oasis, and monsters will not attack. If other oases want to attack, they cannot hide their tracks and can only attack by force. This makes the tribes that control the oasis more restrained. As a result, the duck grass oasis has always lived in peace. However, the area of the oasis has not changed. The population of the tribe has been increasing. The original protection has now become a shackle. The seeds of the god of agriculture can temporarily solve the food problem, but in the end, we have to admit that the size of the oasis determines the future of the tribe. If, that is to say, if the tribe can move to the plains and quickly occupy the vast land, then, can they develop a larger population and a stronger force than now by living in the oasis? The patriarch couldn't help but imagine that day. As the patriarch, how much power and how many gold treasures he would have. The old priest saw the change in the patriarch's face clearly, and understood that the patriarch was moved. So he said, "Chief, do you still remember Manwo? He was the chief of our tribe 300 years ago. He ordered the abandonment of the original small oasis. He risked his life for the future of the entire tribe and killed all the original tribesmen in the duck grass oasis. Only then did we occupy the duck grass oasis, and the tribe has become stronger step by step to this day." The chief who ordered the relocation and led the entire tribe to fight to the death is remembered by the tribesmen to this day. His descendants have also been supported by the entire tribe and have no worries about food and clothing for the rest of their lives. That was a decision that made our entire tribe prosperous. Now, there is a similar choice in front of you. Chief, make your choice. The chief was moved by the words of the high priest. He wanted to gain the same reputation as Manwo. He also wanted more power and a stronger tribe. Will abandoning the belief in the desert god really not anger the desert god? The chief was worried about the god's anger. The old priest comforted the chief. God will not care about a mere human tribe like us. Besides, leaving the desert and believing in the god of agriculture is also to get the blessing of the god of agriculture. Maybe the god of agriculture will give better seeds to believers. Then our tribe will be one step ahead of the tribes that do not believe in the god of agriculture. The chief thought about it and felt that it made sense, so he said, Let the tribal caravan find a way to the plains. Yes, the old priest responded with satisfaction. This scene was played out in countless oases near the changed landforms. Different tribes made different choices. In the desert in the south, 8 men patted the yellow sand on their bodies. Camels carrying water bags and food were also shaking their bodies to clear the sand on their bodies. It's really hell. The leading man cursed. I almost lost my life. Boss, should we go back to the oasis? The man with a fox fur hat on his head suggested with lingering fear. Go back. The leading man raised his hand and hit his arm, saying, after the sandstorm dissipates, it won't come back for half a month. Besides, we've found this place. Maybe the body of the husband of the woman with the gold nugget is in the camp ahead. The man in the sand fox hat didn't dare to say he wanted to go back, but just muttered, how do you know it's a body? Maybe it's a living person. The leading man heard it and sneered in his heart. He said he would take the body back, so he would take the body back. After packing up, the leading man urged them to hurry up. They must arrive earlier than others to get the body. Water and grass oasis. Damses looked at the papyrus in his hand with an ugly look. At this time, a tall and thin man walked in. He saluted respectfully and said, Priest. 2 more people came to the tribe and preached their omnipotent God. Are they in the same group as the one who killed the patriarch? Damses asked coldly. Yes. The tall and thin man nodded. He took out a papyrus that was exactly the same as the one in Damses' hand and handed it over. Damses took it, glanced at it, and his expression became even uglier. Tell all the warriors in the tribe to arrest anyone who has anything to do with these lunatics. Take the 2 people who preached the so-called omnipotent God to the market. Use stones to smash their bodies bit by bit. The tall and thin man was not afraid when he heard this, but felt happy. Yes. After answering, the tall and thin man was about to leave. Wait. Damses called him and said, tell the whole story of the tribe leader's 2 daughters. At the same time, the tribe should also make it public for everyone to see. Then tell this to the caravans that come to trade, and let them spread it to other oases. Also, when telling other caravans, don't hide the fact that the tribe leader was killed by his newly married wife. The tall and thin man thought for a moment and said, the tribe leader expelled the preacher of the omnipotent God, then he was murdered by the crazy woman Ascent. I will tell the caravan so. Priest. Go. Damses nodded. After arranging this matter, Damses called the deputy leader of the tribe, Flo. Master Priest. Flo saluted respectfully. Select some young men who believe in the desert god devoutly. Damses handed over the 2 papyri in his hand. Let them pretend to believe in the omnipotent God, and then find out the base camp of those lunatics. Yes. Flo took the papyrus, nodded vigorously, and left. Yellow Sand Temple. Seth opened his eyes, and the temple was empty. There was no letter from the gods who depended on the desert. Seth had expected this. However, he was still disappointed. After all, the gods who depended on the desert were equivalent to his subordinates to a certain extent. With such timid subordinates, he could not expect them to be of any use. This reminded Seth of the fact that they were persuaded by Shu in a few words. He could not help but be more disappointed with these gods. Putting this matter aside, Seth got up and headed for the edge of the desert. The sun had begun to set, and it would be dark in some time. Today he would go to the underworld again to sanctify more of the underworld and bury the forged artifacts to maintain the already sanctified land and prevent it from being transformed back by the dead air of the underworld. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 62 Solution. Above the swamp, the majestic and magnificent temple stood in the air. Shu frowned and scattered all the holy books in front of him. Tefnut put down the twisted pottery in his hand and asked curiously, what happened in the desert again? It's amazing that hundreds of gods who rely on the desert for their existence have written to you at the same time. Did Seth beat them, or did they ask you to divide the desert territory? Hearing Tefnut's several speculations, Shu smiled bitterly. Neither. They said Seth might be crazy. During the day, Set suddenly set off a sandstorm throughout the desert. It almost killed all living things in the desert. How could it be? Nephthys was shocked for a moment, and asked quickly, "What's the situation in the desert?" "Everything is normal," Shu sighed, "except for the death of some wild beasts. People are basically fine, and the oases are still there." "What's the reason?" Tefnut was a little relieved and asked. Hearing this question, Shu showed a helpless expression on his face. "They are afraid of Set and dare not ask why." "That's why they told me this." Tefnut was speechless. Shu was a little worried about Set and said, "I'll go see little Set. If it's because of the loss of power that caused him to have problems, the matter of changing the desert must be suspended." "Yes," Tefnut nodded. The underworld. Set walked indifferently through the place that was desertified yesterday and transformed into the scorched earth of the underworld today, until he came to the place where the reed marsh was first discovered. He was surprised to find that Nano was still here. When Nano saw Set, he saluted quickly, "Honorable God." Hearing this title, Set felt very awkward and said, "Just call me God." "Yes, God," Nano responded respectfully. Set asked curiously, "Have you been staying here all the time?" "Yes." Nano nodded. "Aren't you bored?" Set looked at Nano, who looked like a teenager, and said, "It stands to reason that even if he becomes a dead spirit, the boy's playfulness and curiosity will not change." Nano smiled and said, "It won't be boring. I don't know what happened to the wandering undead nearby, but they can talk. They also came to chat with me on their own initiative, but they can only speak half a sun's worth of language all day." Set heard this and knew that he had to deal with these undead. He didn't answer, but took out the scepter artifact he had made. The slender scepter was covered with desert divine patterns, and the divine patterns contained the divine power injected by Set. Nano was frightened by the breath of the artifact and ran away. After mobilizing the power of faith to cover the scepter with a layer of camouflage, Set buried the scepter deep under the yellow sand. In an instant, the whole desert seemed to come alive. The dead air of the underworld could no longer erode the desert. Set was very satisfied, and then took out the ankh. The breath of the desert surged out, and Set frantically called for the authority of the desert. The four powers were frantically transformed into desert divine power. The desert divine power, like a flood, poured into the yellow sand under Set's feet through the ankh. Then it quickly spread far away. In the blink of an eye, it was at the edge of the desert of the underworld. After just a short pause, the desert quickly transformed into the scorched earth of the underworld. Set stood there, feeling the recovery of his strength. Every time he transformed the scorched earth of the underworld, he recovered a little more. The edge of the swamp. Under the moonlight, Nephthys sat on the temple that looked like a house, smiling, looking at Robus not far away. Robus, the upper god, the god of green poison vines and blue poison flowers. Robus was handsome, wearing a white and green skirt, and wearing gold rings engraved with divine patterns on his arms, wrists, and ankles. He was very excited and shy at the moment, and looked at Nephthys in the moonlight with obsession. "Ropers, come and sit here." Nephthys smiled gently. Hearing this, Robus hesitated for a moment, but still sat next to Nephthys. Nephthys handed him a glass of wine and said, "Try it." Robus took the wine with a red face, took a sip, and praised, "It tastes good." "Robus, do you love me?" Nephthys looked at the shy Robus and asked softly. Robus did not hesitate to answer this question firmly. "Nephthys, I swear to the god Ra that I only love you from beginning to end." As soon as the voice fell, a ray of sunlight appeared out of thin air and wrapped around Robus' wrist. Then it immediately dissipated. This proved that the oath was true and Robus was telling the truth. Seeing this, Nephthys put away her smile, showed a sad expression, and whispered, "Robus, do you know, I long for a sincere emotion, like the love of the god of wisdom and the god of truth, which has not deteriorated for millions of years. Beautiful and pure, I want to have that kind of love." Under the cold moonlight, Robus looked at the sad Nephthys. He only felt that Nephthys was fragile, helpless, and needed his help. Robus looked at Nephthys with emotion and said, "Nephthys, are you willing to marry me?" Nephthys looked directly at Robus, her eyes full of tears. The tears hurt Robus' heart. He wanted to comfort Nephthys, but he only saw a cloud of mist, a black mist, Then he lost consciousness. Nephthys put away all his expressions, lifted Robus with one hand and entered the temple. The underworld. Set temporarily stopped injecting divine power into Ankh. Just let Ankh turn the scorched earth of the underworld into sand with its own divine power. Although the speed will slow down, Set has freed up his hands to do other things. Standing there to rest for a while, Set closed his eyes and called for the broken power of destiny in his heart. The power of the four powers was also transformed into the power of destiny at this moment. Set opened his eyes and raised his hand, palm up. A white spider phantom covered with cracks appeared in his palm. The next moment, the white spider phantom sprayed out countless white spider silk. These spider silks seemed to have life, and they rushed towards the wandering dead souls on the land of the underworld. The dead souls who regained their ability to speak talked to other dead souls. They had no idea that the spider silk had already reached them. The moment the spider silk touched the dead soul, it entangled the dead soul. In the blink of an eye, the dead soul was covered with spider silk, and his expression became stiff and empty. Seth easily knew the life of this dead soul, then the life of the next dead soul. As the spider silk spread, more and more dead souls' lives were known to Seth. Seth did not like this feeling of watching other people's lives, therefore, he isolated the memory obtained by fate. He just manipulated the spider silk of fate to spread continuously until all the dead souls on the land of the underworld except Nano were captured with spider silk. Entangled by the spider silk, the dead souls fell into the memories of their own lives. This was Seth's solution. Let the dead souls who were awakened by his fusion of the broken power of fate fall into the spider web of fate again. Chapter 63 Seth's Bad Luck. After doing all this, Seth took back the broken power of destiny. At this moment, the scorched earth of the underworld continued to turn into sand under the power of Ankh. Seth took back Ankh and the sanctification stopped. The buried artifacts emitted divine power to ensure that the desert would not be eroded by the dead air of the underworld. Seth also superimposed the power of human and broken destiny to arouse the power of faith in the underworld to cover up the abnormality of the scorched earth of the underworld. After doing all this, Seth knew that he had to leave because it was about to rise. However, before leaving, Seth looked at Nano in the distance. He felt that this young man was a little pitiful. Except for him, all the undead souls washed ashore were trapped in the spider web of fate again. The undead souls who talked to him would not talk to him again today. In that case, he would feel lonely. It's a pity that the dead souls became undead souls and could not leave the underworld. The undead souls washed ashore could no longer enter the Styx and reincarnate. Otherwise, he could take Nano away from the underworld or send him to reincarnate. Sighing silently, Seth left the underworld. Then he returned to the Yellow Sand Temple as quickly as possible. He pretended to be in a state of power loss and sat on the throne. Not long after he sat on the throne, Seth sensed Shu's breath. Seth was a little surprised about this. However, it was not Shu's arrival that was unexpected, but that he came too early. Shu walked into the temple, saw the weak Seth, and sensed his breath of power loss, and couldn't help but have pity in his eyes. "Little Seth, how do you feel?" "Not very well," Seth replied weakly. Hearing this, Shu sighed and asked directly, "You should know why I came." "Little Seth, tell me honestly, have you lost control?" "If I have lost control, there will be no life in the desert except me." Seth told the truth. In fact, he considered telling a lie, and denied the fact of losing control. However, the sandstorm was witnessed by gods and people. Lies cannot cover up the facts, so lying will make yourself look more like you are completely out of control. After all, a madman will not admit that he is a madman. Based on this reasoning, Seth chose to tell the truth. Of course, it was selective truth-telling. "Is there a problem with authority?" She looked at Seth worriedly. "Yeah," Seth nodded. "The constant stripping of power made me very angry and terrified. That led to a brief loss of control." As expected, the situation that Shu least wanted to see happened. The large-scale loss of authority was too much damage to God. "But I have adapted to it," Seth said sincerely. "The sandstorm incident will not happen again." She looked at Seth, his golden pupils full of sincerity. However, even so, Shu still shook his head. "It concerns tens of millions of lives in the desert." "So, I can't believe your one-sided words. Next I will stay with you for 7 days. I can only make a conclusion after witnessing your situation with my own eyes. Seth was stunned and subconsciously wanted to object. If Shu stayed with him, how could he turn the scorched earth of the underworld into sand, condense the spider silk of fate, and absorb the power of faith? However, excessive opposition is obviously more suspicious. There was no way. Seth finally nodded and agreed to this method. It's just 7 days. Just bear it and it will pass. The junction of the swamp and the forest. The sun rose, and a ray of sunlight penetrated the window and sprinkled in the house-like temple. Robes rubbed his forehead and sat up in a daze. Where is this place? Why is he here? 2 doubts appeared in his mind. The next moment, Robes had a memory in his mind. Nephthys invited him to the temple, and then they drank and talked under the moonlight. After that, Nephthys also showed her vulnerable side. Seeing the beloved Nephthys like this, Robes couldn't help but hug Nephthys into his arms. Nephthys did not resist Robes' actions. Instead, her fingers rubbed his heart. Nephthys' fingers seemed to have magic, making his whole heart numb. Then, they took advantage of the moonlight to enter the temple of Nephthys. Thinking of this, Robes blushed with shame. It was his first time. Robes, immersed in beautiful memories, didn't notice that a black scale appeared between his eyebrows. At this time, Nephthys walked in from outside the room. Nephthys. Robus looked at Nephthys with love. Nephthys also looked at Robus with love and said, "Rest for a while. You drank too much last night." "Yeah." Robus nodded obediently and said, "Can you accompany me?" Nephthys smiled and said, "Okay." At this moment, Robus felt happy, and another scale appeared on his forehead. At the junction of the forest and the plain, in the temple built by vines, giant trees and flowers, Isis looked solemn and dispersed the letter in her hand. Just now, it was a letter from Hero, the god of sunlight grass. He told Isis what happened in the desert yesterday. "Is there still a problem with my little brother?" Isis's face was full of worry. "We still have to plan ahead. As long as it succeeds, my little brother will recover as before and become stronger. I will also have the strength to protect everything." Whispering, Isis made up her mind. "However, the most urgent thing is to visit my younger brother." Isis left a divine power and told Osiris, who was going to deal with the believers, about the matter. She opened the gate of God and went to the yellow sand temple. On the other side, Seth sat on the throne to take a nap. He opened his eyes when he sensed the divine power of Isis in the temple. He saw a divine pattern of the gate of God being quickly drawn in the temple. It was Isis who was coming through the gate of God. It seemed that Isis knew about the sandstorm. Seth looked at Shu, who was sitting aside and reading papyrus. Shu noticed Seth's gaze and asked hurriedly, "Are you going to lose control?" Hearing this, Seth was a little speechless. If he really lost control, he would have exploded long ago. "No," Seth said helplessly, "it's just that my sister is coming." "Yeah." Shu nodded. "She should also come for the sandstorm." A moment later, the gate of God opened. Isis hurried out, her face full of worry. "Little brother, are you okay?" After asking this question, Isis saw Shu beside her. "Isis, long time no see." Shu greeted with a smile. Isis also smiled in response, and then went to check on Seth. Seth still looked weak and powerless. "Don't worry, sister," Seth comforted Isis. "I'm fine." "If I'm fine, how can I lose control?" Isis didn't believe it this time. Seth couldn't refute this sentence. However, Seth felt that he was a little unlucky. He spent so much empty power of faith, but he still couldn't weave a thread of destiny. He also made himself out of control, which caused Shu to watch him for 7 days. Chapter 64, Remarks on the Release. The book is on the shelf. Please give me a first order. At the same time, I would like to thank the people who gave me rewards. Thank you, Mo Yen, Fora, Zashun Munuan, Xiao Xiaozi Book Friends 2023060818121927 Book Friends 2024022311323436 and everyone who reads the book. Thank you. The update time will be changed to 12 noon and 10 p.m. The minimum update will be 6,000 words, and one chapter will be 3,000 words. Chapter 65, Corpse in Gold. Isis confirmed that Seth was not out of control at the moment, so she made a suggestion to Shu. I think we should stop flattening the desert, wait until Set adapts to the current range of the desert. Shu understood Isis's feelings, and he put down the papyrus in his hand and said, things decided by the Gods' Council need to be refuted with definite evidence. So, we still have to continue to change the desert. You and Osiris change the desert, and I will stay with Set. If Set loses control again, then I will convene a Gods' Council and tell the gods to stop changing the desert. Set spoke for Shu. Sister, do what the God of Order says. With the God of Order here, he won't let anything happen to me. He had to speak for Shu. It's best to solve the issue of changing the desert landform quickly. In this way, the gods who are watching him will focus on helping humans. At that time, he can also continue to sanctify the land of the underworld, weave the spider silk of fate, and absorb the power of faith. If it really drags on, it may really be endless. Isis understood that this was for Set's good, so she no longer had any objections. She left a divine power full of life breath to relieve Set's pain, and then left through the gate of God. Needless to say, she was going back to find Osiris and start today's desert change. Set watched the breath of the gate of God dissipate, closed his eyes and took a nap. Being under guard, Set had nothing to do and could only sleep to pass the time. She looked at Set, shook his head helplessly, and took out a new piece of papyrus to look at. After a while, Shu laughed. Don't say it. He really admired these lower gods. It turned out that the golden bird god and the sand goose god had a past. You know, they look down on each other and are enemies who curse each other when they meet. If it wasn't for the god who dug up this matter and made it public, Shu would never have thought of it. Hearing Shu's laughter, Set opened his eyes. He was very curious. What was Shu laughing at when he looked at the papyrus? God of Order, is there any interesting story written on the paper? Hearing Set's voice, Shu smiled and handed him the papyrus. Set took it with strong curiosity. What caught my eye was the lace-bordered hieroglyphic title. The brocade bird and the sand goose had a love affair. Under the title, it was written from a perspective as if it were a personal witness, describing the daily life of the brocade bird god and the sand goose god. It was even revealed that the brocade bird god would affectionately call the sand goose god Yin. The sand goose god called the brocade bird god Niao Niao. Ugh. Seeing this, Set retched. Good man, this nickname is really disgusting. It was the first time he heard such a nickname. Set read the rest of the story with a look of disgust. According to the kind-hearted god who did not want to reveal who it was on the paper, the two gods separated because the sand goose god fell in love with the bluebird god. If Set remembered correctly, the bluebird god seemed to have entered into a marriage with the golden featherbird god. As for the Yin and Niao Niao pair, Set remembered that they did not get along well with each other, and they either fought or scolded each other when they met. Originally, he thought they had a private feud, but he never thought there was such a past. Have you finished reading? Shu asked with a smile. Yeah, Set returned the papyrus. Isn't it interesting? Shu continued to ask with a smile. Set stared at Shu's face, making sure that he saw a hint of approval in his smile. It's quite interesting. This was not to please Shu. The bloody past of Yin and Niao Niao was indeed interesting. It made him endure the disgust of their nicknames and read the whole story. Shu smiled even more and said, do you want to read the rest? Yes, Set answered decisively. Being watched by Shu, he couldn't do anything. Instead of sleeping, it's better to read gossip. However, Shu, the god of order and the main god who can convene the gods' meeting, likes to read gossip. This was really beyond Set's expectations. Shu took out a stack of papyrus and stuffed it to Set. Take your time to read it. Thank you. Set thanked him politely. Then, the two gods took the papyrus and spied on the gods' gossip. At the edge of the desert and the plain, Isis and Osiris stood in midair. Osiris already knew that Set had lost control, and also knew the method proposed by Shu. Likewise, he knew Isis's reluctance. Perhaps, we can flatten a small part of the desert today. Osiris looked at Isis and said, no need. Isis shook her head. Do as the god of order says. She was not a hesitant person. If she agreed to Shu's method, she would execute it. Okay. Osiris said nothing more. Isis took out the Ankh and mobilized the power of life. Osiris also took out the Ankh and mobilized the power of plants. Then, the two controlled their respective powers to merge. With the abundant life force, the green grass and flowers on the plains grew wildly. Then, the two gods slowly flew towards the desert. Plants also quickly covered the desert. At the same time, in the yellow sand temple, Seth's breath suddenly weakened, making him weaker. Pain, resentment, dissatisfaction and other negative emotions filled Seth's heart. For this, Seth suppressed all these emotions. If he still only had the triple authority, he would not be so calm if the desert authority was in trouble. However, he has the authority of man, the broken authority of fate, and the desert of the underworld. He can calmly ignore the pain of losing authority, because he will make up for the loss and gain more. Shu naturally sensed the change in Seth's breath and saw Seth's indifferent expression. After confirming that Seth was not out of control, Shu felt a little relieved, but did not relax his vigilance. The power of order is ready at any time to prevent Seth from suddenly erupting. South of the desert, the team of 8 men looked at the tent with a gold coin pattern in front of them and became excited, because they got the map from the woman who offered a reward of gold nuggets to find her husband. It was marked on it that her husband's tent was embroidered with a gold coin pattern. They immediately drove the camels under them to speed them up. Not long after, they arrived in front of the tent. The leading man tried to shout into the tent, "Is anyone there?" There was no response from the tent. The man looked back at his men, waved his hands to signal them to surround the tent, and made a gesture of cutting his neck. The other 7 people immediately drew their knives and surrounded the tent. "Is anyone there? I'm your wife's friend looking for you," the leading man called out again. There was still no response from the tent. Seeing this, the man drew out the long knife from his waist and chopped hard. The door curtain of the tent was cut off, and what came into the man's eyes was a mummy wearing a linen robe. The leading man put down the knife and took out the papyrus. After carefully comparing the mummy and the portrait, he finally determined that it was a person. "Okay, we found the body." The leading man laughed. The other 7 people heard this and gathered together, and they were also very excited, because the tent and the mummy were intact. It meant that they were the first to find the mummy. Now as long as they take the mummy back, the gold nugget the size of a human head will belong to them. Suddenly, a small man noticed that the mummy seemed to be holding something in his hand. He walked into the tent curiously and pried open the palm of the mummy without hesitation. A golden bead rolled down from the palm of the mummy's hand. The dazzling gold attracted everyone's attention. The little man picked up the beads, looked at them carefully, and excitedly shouted to the leading man, "It's gold." The leading man looked at the spacious tent, his eyes full of greed, and said, "Search it once." "Yes," the men responded. Soon the tent was turned upside down. They did not find more gold beads in the tent. There were only some shovels, clothes, scones, and a map. The men handed the map and gold beads to the leading man. He put the gold beads away and opened the map again. Just one glance shocked him, because the map showed the surrounding landforms and marked them with secular characters. There was treasure buried here. The leading man immediately walked out of the tent and searched around. His men didn't understand why, but they followed him, until not far from the tent. They found a pit covered with wooden boards. The leading man lifted the wooden boards and was dazzled by a pile of neatly stacked gold bricks. "Gold nuggets!" the little man shouted. The others were so excited that they didn't know what to say. Dig it all out." The leading man forced himself to calm down and commanded his men to dig for treasure. The shovel was ready, and the men quickly dug out all the gold in the pit. The gold piled up as high as half a person. The leading man's eyes were red. He had never seen so much gold. More importantly, the gold still belonged to him. "Boss, we are rich," the man with a feather hat on his head said excitedly. The leading man hummed, reluctantly moved his eyes away from the gold, and said, "Pack up the gold and the body. We should go back." "Yes," the men responded loudly. Then they went to find a bag to pack the gold nuggets. The leading man stood there, looking at the gold, and felt that his breathing was itchy. He didn't care, thinking that it was like this when he was excited. Soon, his men packed the gold nuggets and put them on the camels and bitches. Then they wrapped the mummy with cloth and tied it to the camel. After doing this, the 8 people rode away on camels. Huangsha Temple. Seth felt his own power being discarded, and the feeling of his real name being torn apart stopped, so he informed Shu, "Sister and the others have finished changing the desert today." Shu did not even raise his head, and continued to look at the papyrus in his hand, saying, "I know." Seth was helpless, obsessed with gossip. At this time, a golden bird flew into the temple and stopped in front of Seth. "The breath of Hathor." Shu took a look and said. Seth touched the golden bird. The bird disintegrated into a series of holy book texts. After a quick glance, Seth was relieved. Hathor also heard about the sandstorm, so she wrote to show her concern. She did not mention anything about Amon. It should be said that the expression of the entire letter was limited to friends. Shu would not doubt it after reading it. As for whether Shu would peek, Seth thought it was impossible. He was so gossipy. Seth calmly dispersed all the words. Shu suddenly said, "Little Seth, stay away from Hathor." Chapter 66 Time and Planning. Seth tried to pretend to know nothing and asked, "Why?" Shu held the papyrus with a complicated expression and said, "Hathor has a god she loves. She won't treat you sincerely. Stay away from her so that you won't get hurt." This reminded Seth of Amon. Shu should also be talking about Amon, as a god who existed before the creation of the world. He experienced the things that happened between Hathor and Amon after the creation of the world. Combined with what Seth knew about Amon and Hathor, it can be confirmed that Shu is doing this for his own good. Seth didn't intend to say more on this topic. If he let it slip, it would be all over. So, Seth said calmly, "I know she doesn't love me. I don't love Hathor either. She and I are just friends." She looked at Seth so calmly and said no more. At this time, the divine pattern of the gate of God was outlined in the air of the temple. The breath of the divine pattern is Isis and Osiris. Sensing the breath, Shu couldn't help but think of Keb and Nut. For a long time, those two stubborn ones made Shu and Tefnut doubt whether it was when they were born. They accidentally got involved in the chaos of the flood, so that they became what they are now. "You four have such a good relationship." Shu couldn't help but sigh. Seth smiled, but suddenly thought of Nephthys, this youngest sister. She seemed to have disappeared after the gods' council. Did she give up Osiris? No. In the predetermined fate, she and Osiris would definitely give birth to Anubis. Thinking of this, Seth couldn't help but feel a little anxious. In the predetermined fate he glimpsed, the birth of Anubis often meant that Osiris would turn against him soon. After that, Horus was born. Then Horus killed him with the help of a group of gods. He has not yet woven his own destiny and cannot escape the predetermined destiny. He must find a way to delay the process of the predetermined destiny. The first thing Seth thought of was to destroy Osiris's fertility, but soon he thought that one of Nephtys's powers was fertility. Isis was still able to give birth to Horus even though Osiris was missing a piece and was a corpse. As the goddess of fertility, Nephthys could easily restore Osiris' fertility. So, if he killed Osiris, could Nephthys still make the corpse fertile? Probably not. Wait. Seth suddenly realized that he was planning to kill Osiris. Putting this idea aside, Seth calmed down his chaotic thoughts. At this moment, Isis and Osiris walked out of the gate of God. Isis smiled at Shu, then walked quickly to Seth's side. She was relieved only after carefully confirming that Seth was fine. Osiris stood aside, looking at Isis and Seth helplessly. Seth avoided Osiris's gaze, so that he would not think about how to kill Osiris again. "Isis, at the current speed of changing the desert, how long will it take to complete?" Shu asked. 6 solar months. Isis gave the answer. Osiris added, "The desert is too vast. This is already fast." Shu nodded slightly and said nothing more. Seth wanted to ask Isis about Nephthys' situation, so he asked, "Sister, has Nephthys come to you recently?" Isis shook her head and said, "She is hiding from us." This answer was something Seth had never expected. He was stunned for a moment and asked, "Why?" "Because I want to take her to Hathor." Isis was helpless. There was no need to ask this. Seth knew that Isis wanted to use Hathor's power of love to help Nephthys find her other half. No wonder Nephthys was hiding. She loved Osiris. Hathor was afraid that she would expose her secret. Osiris said, "Let her calm down." Nephthys' topic naturally ended. After that, Isis and Osiris stayed with Seth for a while and then left. Shu still sat aside, watching the gossip between the gods. Seth closed his eyes and thought about how to delay Nephthys from giving birth to Anubis. And, he must get more power of faith. Only then can he endlessly try to weave the thread of his destiny. In the south of the desert, 4 women dressed tightly, with only their eyes exposed, rode camels and looked around carefully. Suddenly, the woman at the head of the team pointed to the distance and said, "The tent embroidered with gold coins." The remaining 3 people looked in the direction she pointed. Sure enough, they saw a tent embroidered with gold coins. The map given by the woman looking for her missing husband clearly marked the tent logo of her husband. The 4 women rode camels and rushed over. It was quiet all around. The leading woman stopped the 3 companions who were about to enter the tent and shouted into the tent, "We are not desert bandits. Your wife asked us to find you." After the words fell, there was still no movement in the tent. The leading woman took a stick from the camel and quickly lifted the tent curtain. Ah! The next moment, 2 exclamations rang out. Looking at the man who had become a mummy, the leading woman took out the papyrus and compared it. After confirming that it was the husband the woman was looking for, she sighed. A woman who could take out a gold nugget as big as a human head to find her husband must really love her husband. However, the man she loved was already dead. The poor woman might have to spend most of her life to accept this fact. After a moment of pity for the lovers, the leading woman called the other 3 into the tent and began to clean up the body. The body could be rewarded for taking it back. However, when cleaning up the body, a golden bead the size of a date fell from the mummy's hand. After the leading woman identified it, it was confirmed to be real gold. She realized that the mummy must have planned something by leaving his wife and coming here. Combined with this golden bead, the leading woman quickly asked people to search the entire tent. Soon, a papyrus with gold markings was found. After that, the women found the covered pit again, and dug out a half-man-high gold nugget from it. They were ecstatic to get so many gold nuggets. Afraid of running into other people who were looking for the man, they hurriedly left with the gold nuggets and the body. The leading woman felt that they were walking too fast, so that she felt itchy when she breathed. She must take a good rest after returning to the oasis. Duck Grass Oasis. The old priest came to the chief's residence. The chief, who was drinking, saw the old priest coming and smiled. "High priest, let's drink together." The high priest did not refuse this. He sat aside and drank a glass of beer. The chief was a little surprised that he was not admonished for drinking during the day for the first time. In the past, when he drank during the day, the high priest would always admonish him not to drink, in order to avoid the tribe encountering something that needed the chief to come forward to solve. He, the chief, would be drunk unconscious. The high priest put down the pottery cup and smiled. "Chief, our caravan encountered a caravan from the plains." "Caravan from the plains?" The chief was stunned, and then surprised. "Aren't they looking for the plains?" Now if they encounter a caravan on the plains, they can get a route map from them. The high priest naturally knew what the chief was thinking, and he thought the same. "We have captured all the people in the plain caravan. After a few days of interrogation, our tribe will be able to get a route map." "Good." The chief slapped his thigh excitedly. "We must reward those who capture the plain caravan." "Yes." The high priest nodded, and said, "In addition to the reward, after 8 solar days, we will sacrifice to the sun god as usual." "Chief, I want to sacrifice to the god of agriculture at the same time." "No problem." The chief agreed immediately. Twisted Forest. In the temple built of giant trees and flowers, Isis sat on the throne, frowning, thinking about something. Not far from the temple, a tall figure with a green body, human body and tree skin slowly walked over. When it reached the entrance of the temple, it stopped and said respectfully, "Lord God of Life, Muni has something to ask you for guidance on what to do." "Come in." Isis's voice came out. Muni bowed his head respectfully and stepped into the temple, step by step to the throne. He raised his hands awkwardly, palms up, and said respectfully, "Lord God of Life, what happened in the Twisted Forest?" Isis asked. "Lord God of Life, recently humans have been entering the Twisted Forest." Muni's face was full of distress. "They hold the statues of the noble gods. The tribesmen dare not drive them away. And, from what they say, it seems that they want to cut down the trees in the Twisted Forest, then plant wheat seeds on the land of the Twisted Forest. Then we tree people will be homeless." Isis sighed and said, "Humans are now favored by the gods. You must avoid conflicts with them." As she said that, Isis took out 10 red gems and gave them to Muni. Place the gems at the border of your territory. They will prohibit humans from entering. But, outside the range of the gems, it's up to humans to do what they want. Muni accepted the gems gratefully. Great Lord God of life, the tree people will always be loyal to you. Go. Isis waved her hand. After Muni left, Isis looked at the empty temple and spoke coldly. Is the plan still not implemented? A man's voice replied. You seem very anxious. Ask me this question every few days. The answer is still not yet. We need to wait. But it should be soon. Isis's eyes were full of dissatisfaction. If she didn't want to rely on his plan. If you say half and keep half, you should be killed by her. Don't be angry. The man's voice said again. You haven't collected all the things needed for the plan. Go collect them. Otherwise when the time comes, you won't be ready. Then all plans will be in vain. Isis snorted coldly. If the plan is in vain, I will seal you forever. You should know that I have this ability. After that, Isis took out the Ankh, opened the gate of God, and left the temple. Chapter 67 The Lost Corpse. The end of the Nile. It is also the end of the earth. Nephthys looked at this place. It was very desolate. This was Nephthys' first feeling, because there was nothing else at the end of the Nile except some withered plants. Most importantly, there were no intelligent creatures at the source of the Nile. However, Nephthys knew that he would not lie about what they were planning. Therefore, she took out the palm-length fang. Tsk. Disgusting fishy smell. The next moment, a disgusted male voice sounded behind Nephthys. Nephthys was shocked and instantly wrapped herself with divine power, then turned around and looked behind her. She saw a male god wearing a golden goose feather crown, handsome face, and a black and white skirt. Seeing this, Nephthys became more alert and even stepped back, because she had never seen the god in front of her among the gods. I won't do anything to you. The male god looked at Nephthys and the tooth in Nephthys' hand with disgust. Who are you? Nephthys took back the tooth in her hand and asked vigilantly. Hearing this, the male god raised his eyebrows. Why, you don't know who I am. Nephthys did not answer, but just stared at the strange god in front of him. I am Amon. Amon said his name, and said, tell me, why do you come to me with a dirty breath? Dirty? Exclamation mark. In an instant, Nephthys hated this god named Amon. However, considering the business, she said, he asked me to tell you that the underworld has been eroded by the god Ra. You must act as soon as possible. After saying that, Nephthys took out the tusk and threw it to Amon. Amon no longer had a look of disgust. He took the tusk and looked solemn. Is the underworld really eroded? Yes. Nephthys nodded. I know. Amon thought about something and said, when are you going to act? Nephthys was not satisfied with this answer. What she wanted was a definite time. Wait until I get enough power of faith. Amon put away the fang and said, only with enough power of faith can we temporarily awaken him. So, go back and wait. After saying that, Amon disappeared. Nephthys could not see how he left, nor could she see what authority he had. This made Nephthys feel relieved and worried. What made her feel relieved was that the god with such power had the same plan as her. What she was worried about was her own safety. After all, there was no contract between them. After deciding to avoid contact in her heart, Nephthys left. A few days later, Yellow Sand Temple. Seth put down the papyrus in his hand and looked at Shu, the god of order, who was standing beside him. Today is the 7th day. Shu looked at the secrets of other gods revealed by a certain god without raising his head, and hummed. Seth was used to Shu's response. After the reminder, Seth looked forward to the arrival of night. He had not entered the underworld for 7 days. Every day Isis and Osiris would change part of the desert landscape. The continuous loss of power in the desert made Seth think more and more about destroying everything. He had to go to the underworld as soon as possible to make up for the lost territory and integrate the power of faith accumulated in 7 days. In an oasis near the heart of the desert, 8 men led camels into the market with grim faces. These 8 people were the group that found the mummy before. Boss, what should we do now? The little man pulled a face and whispered, I don't want to give up the gold nugget as big as a human head. The leading man glanced at him and said, take the clothes left by the mummy and go to the woman. She should know the clothes her husband is wearing. Upon hearing this, the little man immediately smiled and praised the boss for being smart. However, the leading man became more and more dissatisfied with him. The mummy was handed over to the little man for care the night before they arrived at the oasis. The problem was that when they woke up the next day, the mummy was gone. Only the clothes of the mummy were left neatly. They searched the nearby desert again, but did not find the mummy. Although this matter was very strange, it should have nothing to do with the short man. But the leading man was still dissatisfied with his attitude. He had no awareness of messing up things. The leading man was angry and felt that his breathing was itchy. On the other side, 4 women dressed tightly also arrived at the oasis. They didn't look good either. A tall woman looked guilty and scratched her neck from time to time. She felt that her neck was itchy when she breathed. Later, a wooden house in the center of the market. Goya, the market manager of the tribe occupying this oasis, looked irritated. Looking at the man who came to him for an explanation, Goya said, "Someone has found the body of the woman's husband. The woman has also confirmed it with her own eyes. She gave the gold nuggets to the person who found the body, and then left the tribe with the slaves and the body." Impossible. The man rejected it emotionally. This man was the leader of the 8 people. They sold some gold, and after catching the buyer with the greatest demand, he brought the clothes of the mummy to exchange for gold. However, when he arrived, he was told that someone had already brought the body back. Moreover, the woman paid the gold nuggets and left with the body. But that was impossible. The body they found matched everything the woman described, whether it was the tint or the appearance of the mummy. It was impossible that everything matched so well, but the mummy was not the woman's husband! He stared at the market manager in front of him, suspecting that there was something wrong with them. At this time, a slave shouted outside, "Lord Goya, someone else said that they found a body." Upon hearing this, Goya and the leading man were stunned. Then, Goya's face was full of sarcasm. "Another liar!" The leading man was very angry. He also thought that the person who came this time was a liar, and the arrival of this person made him look like a liar. "Let them in." Goya glanced at the leading man sarcastically and said loudly, "Yes." The slave responded. After a while, 4 women with dark skin and nervous expressions walked in. The oldest among them walked in front, carrying a cloth bag. "Lord Goya," the women said in unison. Goya looked at the people who came, and his face was still full of sarcasm. The leading man on one side was very angry, thinking about teaching the 4 women a lesson later. The 4 women sensed something was wrong, but they didn't know why. Goya didn't intend to waste time and asked directly, "You said you found the body?" "Yes." The leading woman nodded. "The body is exactly the same as the portrait on the papyrus." Hearing this answer, Goya glanced at the leading man. Not long ago, he had heard the same answer. The mockery on his face became even heavier. "Then where is the body?" "Lord Goya, the body is lost." The leading woman sighed and said, "This accident happened the night before we came back." Hearing this, the leading man on the side turned pale. "Haha." Goya laughed out loud, but his expression was very angry. "Do you think I, Goya, am a fool? The body is lost. It was lost the night before we returned to the oasis. Are you also trying to say that although the body is lost, the clothes of the body are left?" The 4 women were all shocked. Although the leading woman didn't know why Goya was angry, she accurately described their experiences. But, she knew it was not the time to argue. So, the leading woman immediately took out the clothes left by the mummy from the bag and explained, "Lord Goya, we are telling the truth. This is the clothes left by the mummy. As long as the woman who is looking for her missing husband identifies it, she can testify for us." After the body was lost, they naturally thought of using the clothes left by the mummy to prove that they had indeed found the woman's missing husband. Looking at the clothes that were exactly the same as those taken out by the leading man, Goya sneered at the leading man. "Did you guys have an internal conflict?" The leading man was also confused at this moment. The clothes of the mummy taken out by the leading woman were exactly the same as the clothes left by the mummy in their hands, but they didn't recognize them at all. At this time, the slaves outside the house shouted again, "Lord Goya, someone else is here," and they also said that they found the body for which the reward was offered. Goya noticed something was wrong. 2 groups of people came to deceive him, which could be said to be an internal conflict among a group of people. The appearance of a third group could not be explained by internal strife. "Let them in." The leading man felt fear at this moment. He couldn't help scratching his nose and throat because it was itchy. The leading woman also realized that things were going in a direction she didn't expect. A moment later, a man and a woman walked in. They were a little surprised to see so many people in the room. Then, they saluted respectfully and shouted, "Lord Goya." Goya stared at the man and woman and said, "I ask you to answer." Hearing this, the two were stunned, looked at each other, and finally nodded in unison. "You found a mummy that looks like the one on the papyrus?" Goya spoke a little fast. He wanted to know the answer. The leading man and the four women on the side were even more so. Being stared at by everyone, the man and the woman felt a little uncomfortable, but they just regarded it as the tribe's caution. Yes, the two nodded. Goya heard the answer he didn't want to hear. He frowned and continued to ask, "The body was lost the night before you returned to the oasis?" Hearing this, the man and the woman were shocked and said in unison, "How did you know?" Goya slowed down. This matter was a little strange. After a while, he asked again, "You only have the clothes of the corpse?" "Yes." The man nodded and motioned the woman to take out the clothes. The woman took out a set of clothes from her bag. "Ah!" the four women exclaimed in unison. The leading man threw a shirt and a skirt on the ground with a horrified face. The color and style of the clothes were exactly the same as those in the hands of the four women and the couple. The room fell into a dead silence in an instant. A strange atmosphere spread. Suddenly, the slaves shouted again outside the house, "Lord Goya, someone else claims to have found the body for which a bounty was offered." Hearing this, the leading man suddenly felt a severe itch in his throat. He scratched hard, but it didn't relieve the itch. Just as he scratched hard, the itch turned into extreme pain again. "Ah!" the leading man screamed. Everyone in the room looked over and saw that the leading man had black spots on his neck, which looked extremely creepy. Goya hurriedly shouted, "Come here." 10 slave warriors rushed in. "Catch him and take him to the prison," Goya ordered. The slave warriors rushed forward and quickly subdued the leading man. Because the man did not resist at all, he just screamed in pain, as if he was in extreme pain. The slave warriors took the howling man away. Goya breathed a sigh of relief, but suddenly felt an itch on his arm. He reached out to scratch it, but he saw a black spot appearing on the itchy place. Chapter 68 Spread of Black Spot. Yellow Sand Temple. Seth looked at the empty temple and felt very happy. Earlier, Shu's 7-day guard finally ended. This means that he can enter the underworld and integrate the power of faith he has accumulated, so as to continue to try to weave the thread of fate. However, although he was happy, Seth did not go to another temple immediately. Suddenly, a palm-sized sea buckthorn with red fruits floated into the temple. It was a letter from the sea buckthorn god. Seth waited curiously for the letter from the sea buckthorn god to come to him. These gods are as timid as mice. Why do they suddenly dare to find him? Touching the sea buckthorn, a series of holy book texts collapsed. After reading it carefully, Seth looked solemn. The sea buckthorn god Thorns told him something bad. Many oases in the desert suddenly broke out with a black spot disease. People infected with black spot disease will only feel itchy at first, but soon black spots appear on the itchy body parts. Then there is a piercing pain, and death. This black spot disease spreads very quickly. Even camels, cattle, sheep and other animals have been infected. The gods in the desert tried to use their power to wipe out the disease and cure the infected humans. However, the gods did not know the source of the disease and could not wipe it out. After the infected humans were cured, they would quickly be infected again. This is what was detailed in the letter from Jiz. At the same time, he also said that he had told Shu about this matter and asked Sekhmet to come and heal. Seth dispersed his power and took out the Ankh. He had to go to each oasis he blessed in person, especially the water-grass oasis. Seth was very optimistic about Damesis. He wanted to expand his own faith without arousing the suspicion of the gods, so he needed a capable believer. The gate of God opened, and Seth came to the temple sealed underground. He lifted the sealed temple to the ground and walked in. The wide and exquisite temple was as bright as day, and 2 statues stood side by side. The blank power of white and red faith kept falling from midair. It fell into the 2 statues. One was absorbed by the golden feathers, and the other was stored in the statue. After confirming that there were no signs of other gods, Seth collected the power of faith stored in the statue. It's much less. Seth looked at the blank power condensed in his hand, his expression solemn. As a human god, he naturally knew how much faith each tribe could provide. For now, the power of faith in his hand is small. The most likely possibility is that all the tribes died of black spot disease. With a sigh, Seth merged the blank power in his hand into himself. Although the power of blank faith is not as good as the power of authority, it also relieved him of some pain. After covering up the broken power of fate, Seth sealed the temple underground again. Then, Seth rushed to the watergrass oasis. Going to the underworld can be delayed, and the black spot disease must be solved. After all, he is now a human god, and large-scale deaths also reduce his authority. In an oasis in the desert, under the moonlight, she looked at the people who were wailing in pain, frowning. Master Shu, what should we do? The sea-buckthorn god GC asked respectfully. Use divine power to heal them over and over again. Shu said helplessly, one god is responsible for one oasis, the rest of the things will wait for Sekhmet to arrive. Yes, GC nodded and turned to inform other gods. Shu took out a golden dagger with the divine pattern of order engraved on it. The moment the dagger appeared, the breath of order permeated the entire oasis. Mobilizing authority, endless divine power of order was injected into the dagger. Order at night. Shu raised the dagger, looked down at the oasis, and said, 1. All people and livestock fall asleep at night. As soon as the words fell, the humans and livestock who were still wailing in pain the moment before stopped making any sound. They returned to their houses silently. Then they lay on the bed and fell asleep in the pen. For a while, the whole oasis became quiet, and under the moonlight, it seemed like an ordinary oasis. The gods such as GC who were watching looked at Shu in fear. The powerful power of order made them admire the god of order even more. Order 2. Disease does not exist in this oasis. Shu continued to speak. The divine power of order emanating from the dagger permeated the entire oasis bit by bit. The corresponding order was also implemented at all times, and the black spots on the sleeping people slowly faded. After doing this, Shu looked at the gods such as GC and said, just as I do. Yes, the gods such as GC nodded. Then they scattered to bless mankind. Water and grass oasis. Damses knelt in the temple and prayed. Great desert god, please bless your believers. A disease that will quickly destroy an oasis is spreading among the tribe. Those infected are all believers who believe in you. Their fate is to fight against the ignorant tribes that do not believe in you, not to die from the disease. Please give the tribe a new life. Great desert god. The pious prayer was not answered. Damses prayed again. He was the priest chosen by the desert god, the priest favored by the god. As long as he prayed devoutly, it would definitely reach the ears of the god and get a response from the god. Master priest. Suddenly, the voice of a servant came from outside the temple. Damses stood up and walked out of the temple. Before entering the temple, he told the servants that if there was an emergency, they could call him. Seeing him come out, the old servant saluted and said, Master priest, the lunatics who preached the omnipotent God are here again. They also cured the 13 infected tribesmen who were sealed in the west of the oasis. Cure? Damses was very surprised. Yes, the old servant nodded and said, after seeing it, some people in the tribe asked them to cure everyone. The group of lunatics proposed that in order to cure others, they must believe in the omnipotent God. Damses pondered. After the black spot disease appeared, Damses quickly isolated all the infected people in the west of the oasis. Then he asked the people in the tribe who practiced water magic, plant magic, and fire magic, wash the places where they stayed with water, then burn them, and finally plant flowers and plants. At the same time, no one was allowed to go to the west of the oasis. Those who were isolated were guarded by the sincere followers of Lord Desert God cultivated by Damses. Now it seems that there are traitors among them who betrayed Lord Desert God. Otherwise, those lunatics would not have the opportunity to cure the infected. However, now is not the time to deal with traitors. The ability to cure black spot disease will endanger the belief in the God of Desert. Thus, it will also cause the tribe to lose unity. After thinking about it, Damses came up with a solution. He walked quickly to the residence of the tribal leader. The statue given by Lord Desert God was still in the leader's hands. For the next plan, we must have the statue of Lord Desert God to kill all the traitors. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We are waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 69 God says, "You deserve to die." West of the Watergrass Oasis, it was already chaotic at this moment, with hundreds of people surrounding and shouting at the 20 tribal warriors. Those infected with black spot disease included children, teenagers, and the elderly. Without exception, they all had families, and their families who were worried about them wanted them to be cured. The people who were making trouble said so. Why not let them save people? A man in his 40s shouted hoarsely. The tribal warriors could only repeat over and over again, "They are crazy. The chieftain died in their hands, and they don't believe in the great and noble desert god." After saying that, the tribal warriors would look back angrily at those crazy people and the traitors who betrayed the tribe. If the traitors dared to approach, they would definitely be killed by them. The so-called crazy people were 13 people wearing white robes and pious expressions. 7 men and 4 women, all around 30 years old. Behind them, there were 13 men and women with complicated expressions, and 8 young men wearing tribal warrior cloth armor. Further back was a temporary residence separated by thorns. Thousands of people were isolated here, exuding a foul smell, as well as wailing, groaning, and cries for help. "The priest is here." Suddenly, a loud shout attracted everyone's attention. Not far away, Damses, wearing a white linen skirt and a white linen top, with a golden desert pattern painted on his forehead and a young face, held the statue given by the desert god. He came over with the tribal leader, elders, and some slaves. The people who shouted for the tribal warriors to agree to the 13 people to save people quieted down. After Damses became the priest of God, the tribe became more powerful. In addition, the tribe always emphasized the belief in the desert god. The people of the tribe did not dare to be presumptuous in front of the prestigious priest and the great statue of the desert god. Of course, there was another reason. It was because they were guilty. 13 believers of the omnipotent God. The condition they proposed to treat people infected with black spot disease was to believe in the omnipotent God. According to the rules of the tribe, believing in a foreign god is betraying the desert god. What's more, the chieftain died in the hands of these lunatics. Although they did it for their relatives and loved ones, it doesn't mean they don't feel guilty. Damses walked to a place not far from the tribesmen who were making trouble and stopped. He looked at them calmly. One by one, the tribesmen lowered their heads in shame, but some people decided to break the jar and throw it all away. The blacksmith Lebo, who had just got married 10 days ago, pushed aside the crowd, walked in front of Damses, and saluted respectfully. "My lord priest, I beg and request you, please agree to let the tribesmen believe in the omnipotent God. The black spot disease is spreading outside the oasis. The desert does not keep this disease out. Even if the sick people are abandoned, all the tribesmen will be infected eventually. Then why don't we believe in the God who can cure the black spot disease?" These words were sincere and true, and the people who came to make trouble were moved. "Yes, Master Priest, believe in the omnipotent God." "Labu is right, Master Priest. Please listen to our voices." The people who were making trouble echoed so loudly because they felt that Labu perfectly said what they wanted to say. Moved, they looked at Damses with expectation. They wanted to get affirmation from the young priest. Affirm that they were not selfish, but for the tribe. However, what they saw on Damses' face was indifference. Damses looked directly at the strong blacksmith who could forge weapons for the tribe. "Labu, your parents followed the caravan to sell goods, but they died in a monster attack, leaving behind a debt of 100 gold, and you, who was 9 years old, the chieftain took pity on you, paid off your debt, distributed his own food to you every month, and taught you to read. He noticed that you had a talent for making weapons, so he sent you to be an apprentice blacksmith. After you finished your apprenticeship, did the chieftain ask you to repay or pay back the 100 gold?" Lebu didn't understand why Damses brought up this matter, so he answered truthfully, "The chieftain didn't ask me to pay back the 100 gold, but..." Damses sneered, "But what? How did the chieftain die?" "Because he drove away the believers of the omnipotent God you wanted to believe in. He was killed." Lebu, facing the statue of the desert god, "Do you dare to say that you are worthy of the chieftain?" The harsh questioning made Lebu not know how to answer. He opened his mouth, then lowered his head and said nothing. Damses looked at the fat man who had just shouted the loudest, and said coldly, "Saifu, the day after your wife died, you spent money to buy a new wife. Are you worried about the wife you bought?" The tribal leader sneered and said, "This guy wanted to buy a slave a few days ago. The slave was just 18. In the end, he used tricks and wanted to get it at a low price, but was beaten." Fatty Saifu's face turned pale, feeling ashamed, and lowered his head. Damses coldly named the troublemakers one by one. Damses pointed out those with character problems without hesitation, those who had received favors from the patriarch. He also named them one by one. He grew up in the tribe and knew the tribe members inside out. For the tribe? Damses sneered, "Does the tribe need a so-called omnipotent false god? For a false god, are you going to betray the desert god, the dead patriarch, and the tribe?" The two questions made all the troublemakers lower their heads. Are they really ashamed? Damses didn't think that they were not trustworthy enough to come here to make trouble. However, now is not the time to deal with them. At this time, the 13 believers who had been watching approached. The man in the middle of the 13 believers had a red mark on his forehead, and he spoke, "Believers of foreign gods, our gods are not false gods. Our gods are our masters, and he is the only true God. The gods you believe in are false gods. False gods have brought disaster to you, and this disease is caused by false gods. Believe in the true God. In the eyes of the true God, you are like lost lambs. After guidance, you can get back on the right track." The tribal leader and other tribal warriors looked at the believer in the middle with resentment. Damses was very calm. He held the statue given by the desert god and said lightly, "Those who slander the desert god should burn their faults with fire." Hearing this, the tribal warriors and tribal leaders understood and surrounded them with weapons. Seeing this, the 13 people who were treated not far away and the tribal warriors who betrayed the tribe actually rushed towards the leader and others. Damses chanted a spell, and a wall of fire as high as a person blocked them. After he prayed for the dead patriarch, not only did he have combat strength, but the power of the fire magic he practiced also increased hundreds of times. The tribal leader had long known about the changes in the priest, but it was the first time that the tribal warriors saw a wall of fire as high as a person. No matter what kind of magic it was rarely used in battle because it was not as powerful as weapons. This was common sense for the tribal warriors. Now that common sense was overturned, they were excited, and felt it was natural. Because Lord Damses was the priest chosen by God, the betrayer must also be killed. Damses said coldly, "Yes." The tribal warriors and the tribal leader responded loudly. A cold wind blew. The people who were making trouble looked at the wall of fire as high as a person. There was also the young priest holding the statue of the desert god in the moonlight, with an indifferent face, and a chill in his heart. The man with a red mark on his forehead shouted loudly, "O omnipotent God, please grant your 13 devout believers divine power." The other 12 people also shouted loudly. Boom. The next moment, the believer with a red mark on his forehead was lying on the ground. The tribal warrior leader went up and gave him another leg. The other warriors followed closely. The 12 believers tried to fight back. However, they were not in the advantage of numbers and strength. The tribal warriors did their best to vent their anger tonight. Seeing this, the betrayer on the other side of the fire wall shouted, "Stop! Stop now! Beating the apostles will bring disaster. The omnipotent God will bring disaster to us." Hearing this, the tribal warriors attacked even harder. If the high priest had not said that he would burn them to death, the tribal warriors and the leader would have wanted to hack them to death bit by bit. Upon hearing this, Damses raised the statue of the desert god he was holding and said loudly, "The oracle of the Lord desert god, the sinners who blasphemed the Lord desert god, should be burned to death." Burn to death. The tribal warriors shouted in agreement while beating. Suddenly, the 13 believers who were beaten to a bloody mess and unconscious flashed white light. The wounds on their bodies recovered quickly and their consciousness became clear again. Moreover, they overturned the tribal warriors. The tribal leader dodged the sudden counterattack, drew out the short knife close to his body and chopped the neck of the believer with a red mark on his forehead. Bang! The sound of metal clashing rang out. The long knife made of red copper was actually blocked by human skin. Miracle! The betrayers knelt down and shouted. The believer with a red mark on his forehead looked at the tribal leader and said, "God said that his believers have skin like iron." The tribal leader snorted coldly, quickly retreated, and stopped other tribal warriors from going up. Damses put down his raised hands and chanted a spell in a low voice. God said that his believers are extremely powerful. The believer of the omnipotent God said again. The other 12 believers also stood up and repeated the words of the Red Seal believer. At this moment, they were flashing with white light. The next moment, a fire snake spewed out from Damses' mouth and rushed towards the 13 believers. The fire snake grew in the wind and was already 10 meters long when it arrived in front of the 13 believers. The fire snake hit the 13 believers. The raging fire ignited the 13 believers. The stench of burned flesh instantly filled the noses of everyone present. God said that his believers will not be harmed by fire. The Red Seal believer with carbonized flesh and hideous face said calmly. The 12 believers echoed with the same calmness. The white light flashed more dazzlingly. The 13 believers recovered quickly in the fire. At this time, the betrayers knelt in reverence. The troublemakers had their own thoughts, looking at the 13 believers who were safe and sound in the fire. The tribal warriors were ready for a desperate fight, and the commander looked at Damses. Damses stared at the 13 believers calmly and chanted the strongest spell he mastered in a low voice. Suddenly, Damses stopped singing and looked at the statue he was holding, as if listening to something. After a moment, Damses smiled proudly, held up the statue of the desert god, and shouted, "The desert god says, you deserve to die." Chapter 70 Fighting the Evil God. As soon as the words fell, the statue of the desert god burst into golden light. It illuminated the night, making the area as bright as day. The screams attracted everyone's attention. It was the 13 believers in the fire magic. At this moment, the white light on their bodies dissipated under the golden light. The Red Seal believer shouted loudly, "God said that his believers will be saved." The other 12 believers echoed. However, the white light that saved them several times did not appear again. The fierce fire and high temperature made their flesh and skin burn into carbon. And under the carbonized flesh and skin was liquid flesh and blood. With the holes in the body, it flowed out little by little, and then burned again. Ugh! The burnt smell and such a horrible scene made the timid among the troublemakers vomit directly. Many people turned their eyes away and stopped watching. The betrayers were in a daze at this moment. They looked at the statue of the desert god, not knowing what to do. Damses smiled and watched the 13 believers wail and die. However, until they were left with only bones, the screams did not stop, and the figures of the 13 believers appeared in the fire again. For a moment, Damses thought it was the so-called God's words of the 13 believers, but soon he found out that it was not. Instead, it was more like their souls were still burning in the flames after they died. Suddenly, a white bird flew at high speed above the charred and scattered bones of the 13 believers. God said that the souls of his believers can leave smoothly. Hearing the white bird speak human words, Damses immediately chanted a spell. He wanted to eliminate all possibilities for the enemy to survive. The desert god said that the souls of those who believe in evil gods should be turned into powder. Suddenly, a voice came from the statue of the desert god. Everyone, including the white bird, put their eyes on the statue. The small statue of the desert god came alive at this moment. The handsome face was full of smiles, looking at the white bird. "So that's where you were hiding." After the words fell, the white bird and the figures of the 13 believers in the flames exploded, leaving behind a ground of black powder, blood and flesh, and white flying feathers. The statue of the desert god returned to its original appearance and no longer emitted golden light. The night and moonlight instantly filled the area. Damses put down his hand and looked at the statue of the desert god steadily. He was very sure that he had just heard two oracles. The voice that praised him for doing a good job the first time was exactly the same as the voice of the desert god who chose him as a priest. Damses let out a long breath, calmed down his excitement and turned to look at the betrayers. The tribe favored by the great desert god cannot tolerate betrayers. The water-grass oasis is thousands of miles away. Seth looked down coldly. An oasis that looks like a bird spreading its wings to fly. There are more than 30,000 people in it, including men, women, young and old. Seth even saw the orcs on the grassland and the tree spirits of the twisted forest. They were all praying at this moment. Omnipotent God, please guide our tomorrow. Countless blank powers were generated and finally fell into the temple in the center of the oasis, transforming into an evil force. This scene reminded Seth of the first evil god he destroyed. I wonder what the evil god's true form is this time, Seth thought, and took out the ankh. The power of the desert instantly imprisoned the entire oasis. The people praying in the oasis all stopped and looked up at Seth in the sky. However, what responded to them was a yellow sand rain. The amount of sand and the speed of falling were extremely fast. The entire oasis was soon covered with a layer of yellow sand. An old man in a robe with a red mark on his forehead shouted. God said, "Stop the sand rain." The blank power of faith was born and fell into the temple. Then, an evil force attacked Seth. Seth defeated it casually and gently tapped the temple of the evil god. The temple engraved with messy patterns collapsed. A man in his 30s flew up from the temple. He stood in the air and looked at Seth. The oasis below was filled with crazy prayers and praises. Seth was also looking at the evil god with interest. There was a halo on his head, and his body was also shining faintly, and his expression seemed to pity everyone. It looks good, but it's a pity that it's not suitable for this world, and it's the wrong god. However, before Seth could make a move, the evil god shouted, "I say, let there be light." The next moment, the oasis was as bright as day. It seemed that in an instant, daytime came. An evil power spread and entangled Seth's divine body. However, they could not break through Seth's divine power. The halo behind the evil god's head flickered with light, and he said, "I say, I am the only true God." The next moment, countless white chains appeared out of thin air and tied up Seth. However, Seth was unharmed. Seeing this, the evil god spoke again. "I say, you are a false god." The evil power of faith echoed the evil god, and they transformed into the voices of countless people. There were men and women, old and young, and they repeated the evil god's words in Seth's ears. "I say, you don't have divine power." The evil god spoke again. This time, it was the believers in the oasis below who repeated this sentence. "I say, you are a human being." The evil god continued. At this moment, the expression of pity on his face has turned into disgust. "I say, you are cowardly and weak." The evil god stared at Seth and said. The believers echoed, and the evil power echoed. At this moment, it seemed that this oasis and everyone in this oasis were integrated with the evil god. The evil power of faith reached its peak. "I say, you have black spot disease." The evil god laughed grimly and cursed viciously. After the words fell, black spots appeared on Seth's arms. Seeing this, the evil god laughed grimly. Seth raised his eyebrows and casually pulled open the chains that had never bound him. The divine power transformed from authority washed over the divine body. The black spots immediately faded and no longer existed. The evil god's smile stopped abruptly. After doing this, Seth looked at the evil god like an idiot. If the previous Seth was used against a lower god, then the lower god might be injured. Unfortunately, he is not a lower god. Seth suddenly laughed and said to the evil god, "Are you ready for God's punishment?" The evil god's expression became more and more ferocious. A young man in the oasis shouted, "I am willing to sacrifice myself for God." The bloody power of faith was generated, and the young man died. Seeing this, the people in the oasis began to follow suit. Seth sneered and no longer suppressed the various negative emotions caused by the loss of desert territory. Killing and destruction dominated his body, and reason faded away for the time being. Almost endless divine power burst out, and the ankh hanging in the air burst into dazzling light. The wind blew at some point. The falling sand was rolled up and connected, forming a sandstorm. The oasis, which was as bright as day, became dim and dark. Not enough. Not enough. Seth released more divine power. The howling of the storm increased. The stone houses were ground into powder by grains of yellow sand. Before the evil god's believers could make a sound, they were ground away by the yellow sand, leaving only a skeleton. Soon, the skeleton was also turned into powder. The evil god angrily conjured up a lightsaber and rushed over. Seth did not dodge, but grabbed the lightsaber with one hand and pulled the evil god in front of him. He made a fist with his other hand and knocked the evil god away. The evil god crashed into the oasis and was eroded by the sandstorm. The halo on its head dimmed. Seth dodged and chased after it, and before the evil god could react, the huge divine power hit it. The evil god tried to fight back with the power of faith. However, it was in vain. At this time, a young man blessed by white light rushed over and tried to pull Seth away with his bare hands. He shouted, "Let go of my father." Chapter 71 Man-Made God. Hearing this, Seth turned around and grabbed the young man's head. The power of faith in him tried to erode Seth, but it was in vain. The evil god struggled to break free. Seth stepped on the evil god without looking back. Under the strong pressure, the evil god could only wail helplessly, even if it tried to gather the power of faith again. Except for his son who was firmly protected by the power of faith, everyone else in this oasis died in the stranglehold of the sandstorm. "Is this evil god your father?" Seth looked at the young man coldly. "Yes," the young man answered tremblingly and begged Seth again, "Great God, please let my poor father go. We didn't do anything bad." Hearing this, Seth sneered. When he arrived at the water-grass oasis, Damses was scolding his people. Damses mentioned many times that the patriarch of their tribe expelled the followers of the evil god and was killed. "You lied," Seth sneered. "It's fun to lie to a god who can recognize lies." The young man's face changed suddenly. "Can God recognize lies?" "No, because God is not omnipotent. If a god of lies is born, he may be able to recognize it. Seth can't. He doesn't have the corresponding authority. As for why he said that, it's just a bad taste. Even if a living human has believers, he can't become an evil god." Seth grabbed the young man's head and lifted him up. The young man struggled weakly. "Tell me, how did you keep your father's soul and make him an evil god?" Seth was curious about this question. When humans and other creatures die, their souls will go to the Styx at night. That is the instinct that the soul itself cannot disobey. In addition, with Mythology, the patron saint of the dead, the soul will not stay in the world. "I said, you let me and my father go." The young man cried and negotiated. "Wrong answer." Seth gradually exerted force on his hands and also exerted divine power under his feet. Both sides screamed in an instant, feeling that his head would explode. The young man finally shouted, "It was my brother Mirai. He turned my father into this. I don't know the details. I just know that my father suddenly became like this." Seth loosened his hand slightly and asked, "Where is your brother?" The young man was blessed by the power of faith, and since his brother was the instigator, he must also be blessed. However, at this moment, there were only 3 of them in this oasis. He went to the Blood Bowl oasis to gather believers. The young man said quickly, "I've said it. I beg you to let us go." Snap! Seth crushed the young man's head. He crushed the body of the evil god with one foot and completely wiped out its existence with divine power. After doing this, Seth dispersed the sandstorm. The yellow sand soaked in blood fell back to the ground, mixed with broken meat and bones. It was only when the sandstorm that covered the sky and the sun stopped that Seth realized that the sun had risen. Seth turned around and took away the soul of the son of the evil god who was standing next to the corpse. As for the souls of other people in the oasis, they had already been wiped out along with the body. Contaminated souls are not eligible for reincarnation. Preserving the soul of the son of the evil god is to verify whether his words are true or false. God cannot recognize lies, but fate can peek into a person's life. Then, Seth raised his hand and wrote a letter to Matt. The evil god will be wiped out if he violates the truth. Matt holds the feather of truth and has been using it to explore the birth of the evil god. Wherever the evil god created by faith appears, it will inform the nearby gods. Then, the god who received the news will kill the evil god. However, this omnipotent evil god has existed for a long time. His power can even be comparable to some weak lower gods. After writing down all the things here and sending them to Matt, Seth tried his best to suppress all negative emotions. It was also at this time that Seth smelled the strong smell of blood here. The smell was emitted from this destroyed oasis, blood-soaked yellow sand, and tiny pieces of meat. This made Seth feel terrified. It was not that the scene was horrible, but that Seth found a problem. He has the authority of a man and killed tens of thousands of people, so he would be sad. However, Seth was not sad. The smell of blood actually made him a little fascinated, and he had some bad thoughts. It seemed that if Seth killed some more and listened to their wailing for fun, he would be very happy! Why did he have this feeling? Seth guessed that it was because of the loss of power. The black spot disease killed too many people, and the desert territory was lost. He must go to the underworld tonight. Damses was waiting in the desert temple. He had executed all the traitors, and the troublemakers were also under surveillance. These people will disappear from the tribe little by little in the next 6 months. Damses was nervous, excited at this time. Oracle, the real oracle. In the past, he did say many oracles from his mouth in the name of the Lord Desert God. All of them were to consolidate his position and strengthen the entire tribe. Of course, those oracles absolutely did not damage the name of the noble desert god. But, fake is fake after all. However, the voice of the Lord Desert God told him the oracle before, and he relayed the oracle. This is an honor, the honor of a priest. At the same time, this also means that he is more favored by God than other priests. In the future, it will be much easier to use this title to integrate the people of other oases. Suddenly, Damses felt a little itchy on his right arm. His expression changed drastically, and he immediately looked at his right arm. Black spots grew on the thin arms that were unique to teenagers. Damn it! Damses cursed in a low voice. He clearly asked someone to use water magic to clean himself thoroughly. Why is he still infected? Damses, who was unable to accept this fact, quickly calmed down. Then, he thought of the tribal leaders and tribal warriors. Water magic did not prevent him from being infected, so they were also likely to be infected. They were in contact with the warriors of the tribe. Anxious Damses turned around and wanted to go out, but then he remembered that God told him to wait for him in the temple. After a moment, Damses chose to stay in the temple. Black spot disease is terrible, and incurable. This is for humans, and the Lord of the Desert God will definitely be able to solve it. Thinking about this, Damses walked to the window of the temple. He placed the spot on his right arm where the black spot had grown under the sunlight. You are infected. Suddenly, a voice sounded behind Damses. It was the voice of the great desert god. Damses remembered it. He immediately turned around, stretched his arm forward, and raised his palm. Lord God of the desert. Seth did not respond, but gave Damses a golden water lily. Looking at the golden water lily, Damses turned to spread his hands flat. He lowered his head, and did not dare to look directly at the god. Seeing this, Seth placed the golden water lily in his hand. The moment the golden water lily was placed in Damses' palm, he felt that his arm was no longer itchy. All the fatigue from dealing with tribal affairs and the previous actions in the west of the tribe disappeared. Thank you for the gift of the great desert god, Damses said excitedly. He realized that the desert god had given him the treasure of God. Soak it in the water source of your tribe. Seth said, give water to anyone who has black spot disease. Yes. Damses nodded vigorously. The golden water lily was transformed by Seth's divine power and can eliminate black spot disease. However, according to thorns, even if they are cured, they will soon be infected again. The speed is so fast that the gods are surprised. I hope Sekhmet has a way to cure it completely. Gathering his thoughts, Seth said, Damses, my chosen priest, you know, the desert will be covered by plains soon. Damses has heard from people from other caravans. However, there has been no change near the oasis where they are. This incident will also damage the prestige of the noble desert god, so Damses forbade it to be spread. However, he did not expect that this incident would be said by the desert god he believed in. After thinking for a moment, Damses said, I have heard of it, but I think that's a lie. The desert will not change into a plain. It's not a lie. Seth interrupted him and said, Most deserts will indeed become plains. It's just that the water and grass oasis is not within the scope of change. Damses breathed a sigh of relief when he heard this. If the desert really changes into a plain, the priests chosen by the desert god will be despised. The number of people who believe in the desert god will decrease. It may even threaten his current transcendent status. Seth naturally observed Damses' reaction, and he found it very interesting. It's not that Seth has any different ideas. It's that Damses is a fanatical believer of the desert god. He will spare no effort to maintain the reputation and status of the desert god. But in fact, he is maintaining the rights brought by the priests chosen by the desert god. The obsession with power, coupled with his real talent in this area. With the two complementing each other, Damses is actually more suitable to be the patriarch. His life should be able to weave a thread of destiny. This makes Seth look forward to the day when Damses dies. However, Damses now has more important things to do. Damses, Seth said, looking outside the temple, the desert that separates the oases disappears. Then the oases will become small city-states with city walls. City-states kill each other, and eventually the strongest will unify. This is the country after the city-state. The country is countless times larger than the tribe. Even the land that the sun shines on can be counted as the land of a country. Listening to Seth's description, Damses couldn't help but imagine such a country. A powerful country with countless tribes, slaves, land, and wealth. My chosen priest, do you think there will be a country that believes in the desert god? Seth said at the right time. Damses' eyes lit up and he said with certainty, yes, I look forward to that day. Seth smiled. After that, Seth gave Damses the blessing of war again. This will help him train a powerful and invincible army. After that, Seth left. Damses was left in the temple to digest what Seth had said. Chapter 72 Healing the Lioness. After making a promise to Damses, Seth rushed to the Blood Bow Oasis. The man named Mirai was still there. Seth wanted to know his secret. Also, there should be evil god believers in the oasis, all of whom needed to be killed. In the north of the desert, Sekhmet, wearing a lion crown and a red and gold dress, arrived. In an emergency, Shu asked her to open the gate of God directly and come from the temple of the cactus god Thorns. Shu saw Sekhmet and breathed a sigh of relief, saying, just as the situation in the letter I wrote, the power of God can heal humans with black spots. But, in a short while, they will get black spots again. Sekhmet nodded, and she looked down at the oasis below. The breath of Shu's unique power of order permeated the oasis, and the humans in the oasis, under the influence of order, lived as if nothing had happened. However, from time to time, black spots appeared on someone's body again. They were not terrified, but waited for the black spots to disappear. In fact, it was not him who disappeared, but Shu's power of order that healed him. This happened to the young girl weaving straw mats. She saw black spots on the back of her hand. After a pause, she continued weaving the mats. This time Shu did not take action, and Sekhmet gave her a divine power. The black spots faded immediately. How about it? Can this disease be completely eradicated? Shu asked. Not sure. Sekhmet shook his head. Her illness is not obvious, and this place is full of your divine power. We need to find another oasis that is not blessed by gods all the time. Okay. Shu nodded and took Sekhmet to another oasis. The desert is vast, even if part of it has been flattened. But it is still vast. There are 100,000 oases in this vast desert. There are only more than 2,000 gods, and they have to use divine power to eliminate diseases all the time. Not all of the 100,000 oases have been blessed by gods. Of course, there is also a reason that some gods do not want to contribute. As long as the gods do not lose their authority, it is no problem for a lower-level god to bless 50 oases. Blood Bow Oasis. When Seth arrived, he saw Eli, the Selajinla god who lived in the desert. Desert god. Eli greeted Seth respectfully. In this respect, there was an obvious fear. Seth didn't intend to waste time and asked directly, have you seen the followers of the evil god in the oasis? They are preaching an evil god who claims to be omnipotent. No. Eli shook his head. I have just arrived at this oasis for less than half a day. When I used my divine power to clear the entire oasis, I didn't sense the power of the evil god. Seth thought for a moment and decided to ask the people in the oasis. Eli naturally agreed and prepared to help. The previous sandstorm made Eli dare not do so. He could clearly sense that Seth's current aura was more attenuated than when the territory was divided before. This means that Seth is in greater danger at the moment. He doesn't want to be killed by Seth. Seth didn't care about Eli's uneasiness and fear. As he walked, he took out the papyrus. He drew the appearance of Mirai on it with a reed pen. On the way to the oasis, he had used the thread of fate to glimpse the life of Mirai's younger brother. He did not lie. It was Mirai who made their father an evil god. After finishing the painting, Seth and Eli had quietly arrived at the tavern where the person in charge of the oasis market was. Eli used divine power to block the sight of others. The person in charge saw the god who saved them and knelt down to pray and praise madly. Seeing this, Eli's heart was lifted and he quickly stopped him from kneeling again. The person in charge immediately followed the command of God. He lowered his head and did not dare to look directly at God. Seth handed him the papyrus. Have you seen this person? The market is the only entrance to each oasis. Outsiders who want to enter the oasis can only enter from the market. Mirai, who spreads and gathers believers of the evil god, should attract the attention of the person in charge. Honorable God, I have never seen this person. The person in charge looked at it carefully and gave this answer. Seth calculated the time and said, bring the person who was responsible for registering outsiders 7 days ago. Yes. The person in charge nodded respectfully. Then he went to find someone. At this moment, here, although there are more than 30 humans around, Eli still feels uneasy. Seth released his own divine power and sensed the entire oasis bit by bit. With the authority of a man, the power of faith could not escape his perception. Not long after, Seth withdrew his divine power. This oasis is very clean, and there is no power of faith. As Mirzi left, it was also at this time that the person in charge came back with a fat young man. When the fat young man saw God, he also praised, knelt, and prayed. Eli grinned and told him not to dawdle and answer the question first. The papyrus was in the hands of the person in charge, and he had already shown it to the young man. Honorable God, this person has never been to our oasis, the fat young man said. Hearing this, Seth looked at Eli. Leave the painting with you and have someone check it out. If he comes, kill him, seal his soul, and then tell me. Kill all the believers of the evil god in this oasis. Yes, Eli agreed. Then, Seth left. Eli erased the memory of the two people just now. The praise of the people in this oasis made Eli feel very good. He didn't want his subordinate attitude just now to be spread by the two people. In fact, he should erase their existence. However, in the joy of surviving the disaster in front of Seth, he decided to erase only the memory. On the other side, Seth set off to other oases. The oasis that believed in him was not only the water-grass oasis. At the beginning, he wanted to gather the blank power of faith to cover himself. By showing the power of God, he made hundreds of oases believe in the desert god. Since they believed in him, Seth didn't intend to throw it away after using it. Scorpion Oasis. When Shu and Sekhmet arrived, they saw the miserable situation of the entire oasis. People's faces, arms, and bodies were all covered with black spots. The living wailed, cried, and begged. The dead fell in corners, streets, and houses. The livestock also wailed, and they were also infected with the black spot disease like humans. The entire oasis no longer had order. In a few days, they would be tortured to death by the black spot disease. Sekhmet took out the ankh and hung it in front of him, pouring the power of healing into the ankh. At the same time, divine patterns were outlined on both sides of the ankh. Shu was waiting quietly on the side. He had already thought about it. If Sekhmet could not solve the black spot disease, he could only tell Ra about this matter, and Ra would definitely have a way. At this time, two white feathers floated over. One went to Shu, and the other went to Sekhmet. The breath of Mot. He remembered that Mot and Thoth went to trace the source of the black spot disease. Could there be a result? Shu quickly touched the feather, and a series of sacred texts collapsed. After reading it carefully, Shu frowned. It was not that there was a result in tracing the source of the black spot disease. It was Mot who received Set's letter and went to the oasis where the evil god existed to verify what Set said. As a result, what Set said was true. The evil god that was not detected by the wing of truth does exist. The humans who created this evil god and the scattered believers of this evil god have not been completely wiped out. Therefore, Mot informed the gods, check the humans in the oasis, and wipe out all those who believe in the evil god, preach the evil god, and those named Mirai. Shu dispersed Mot's letter and felt bad, especially when he thought about the increase in the number of humans in the future. He was afraid that there would be more people like Mirai. He did not doubt this. After all, he had seen a human gain the authority of God. God Ra should have wiped out all humans. Shu sighed, or eliminate their ability to generate the blank power of faith when they pray. God Ra didn't do that. He must have his own reasons, Sekhmet said. Shu looked at Sekhmet. In front of her squatted a green-haired lioness, and the Sekhmet tank was embedded in the lioness's forehead, exuding healing power. Next to the lioness, there was a series of holy book texts. Maybe. Shu sighed. Sekhmet touched the lioness drawn by divine power and said, "Go and heal everyone." The lioness nodded, stood up, and ran towards the oasis. Above the oasis, people endured the pain and howled. They also prayed with their remaining strength, praying for God to save them. However, no God came. Despair appeared in the eyes of the living people. However, some people still insisted on praying, because after enduring the long dark night, she felt that her pain had subsided. It was the effect of prayer, she thought so, and kept praying with hope. Roar! Suddenly, a roar spread throughout the oasis. Some of the living people instantly looked ashen. A wild beast is coming. Are they going to die in the mouth of the beast? Exclamation mark. Some people laughed, and the black spot disease was extremely terrifying. The powerful and ferocious beast came to the oasis at this moment, which meant that it would die here. Black spots will appear on its skin little by little, and then torture it to death. Some people even hope that there will be more wild beasts. It would be best if there were a few monsters. It would be nice to have them accompany you to die. At this time, people in the east of the oasis saw a lioness with green hair. Under the sunlight, the lioness shone with a warm green light. The people and animals who saw this light seemed to see hope. They felt that their bodies were no longer in pain and they had strength again. Diseases and pains were disappearing. This was not an illusion. A man stared blankly at the black spots all over his body disappearing, and he tried to stand up, just like every morning when he got up to go out to work. He stood up. Miracle! The man cried and shouted. Wherever the lioness walked, the black spot disease was cured, including the black spot disease on the dead people and animals. However, they did not come back to life, and death is incurable. The oasis is gradually rejuvenating. Sekhmet and Shu stood in midair and watched all this. After a long time, the green lioness walked through every corner of the oasis. All living humans and animals were cured. Most people followed the lioness closely, praising and praying, wanting to believe in her. The blank power of faith fell on the lioness, but was completely blocked by the ankh on her head. Chapter 73 Sekhmet's Presumption. The unattached power of faith collapsed, and Sekhmet also let the lioness leave the oasis. More than 30 people followed the lioness, saying that they wanted to become believers, priests, and followers. Among them were sincere people, and there were also villains who wanted to seek benefits after being cured. The healing lioness ignored them all, shook off everyone, and disappeared in the desert. These people could only return to the oasis. On the other side, the healing lioness circled and returned to Sekhmet. The green hair on its body was a little duller than before. Sekhmet touched its head and focused his attention on the oasis. At this time, all diseases in the oasis had been cured, including corpses. The surviving son of the patriarch organized the remaining tribesmen and began to collect the corpses of the tribesmen and count the population and food. They also had to guard against the oasis of not caring about their lives to attack them. Most importantly, they had to guard against some animals infected with black spot disease rushing in. Everything was going on in an orderly manner. However, just one solar hour later, a scream rang out. A young man who was carrying food fell to the ground in pain. The people around him immediately scattered and ran away. Fear was written on their faces. Black spots have grown on his arms, Shu said calmly. In many oases, Shu has seen this situation countless times. Sekhmet's pupils turned emerald green, and she stared at the young man lying on the ground and wailing. After a moment, Sekhmet's pupils returned to brown, and she said solemnly, I know why he got infected again. Shu was alerted when he heard it, and asked quickly, why? It's the desert. Sekhmet looked at the endless desert outside the oasis. The desert contains toxins. The oasis exists in the desert. Even if all the people in the oasis are cured, use divine power to cleanse the entire oasis. But the desert is poisonous. It will infect the oasis all the time, and the oasis will make the people living on it sick. If you want to completely eradicate and cure this black spot disease, you must first clean up the desert. Shu frowned. You said the desert is poisonous. Let's make a comparison. Seeing that Shu didn't believe it, Sekhmet said, find another oasis without gods. Yes, Shu nodded. Before leaving, Shu left a divine power, enough to protect the oasis for a day. One day is enough for Sekhmet to prove what she said. The people in the oasis watched the young man who had just wailed stop wailing and slowly stood up again. They were still terrified, until the young man proved that there were no black spots on his body. Curved moon oasis. This time, the oasis, looking down from midair, looked like a crescent moon. Seth had previously made the entire oasis believe in him. Looking at the corpses covered with black spots and with hideous and horrible death all over the oasis, he was late. With a trace of guilt, Seth used his divine power to cleanse the entire oasis. He also called on the yellow sand to bury the entire oasis, leaving a trace of breath, to prevent their bodies from being dug out and eaten by scavengers. After doing this, Seth rushed to the next oasis. If his authority was not damaged, he could merge with the desert, directly provide protection for all oases, but he could not do this in his current state. The border between the swamp and the forest, a temple that looked like a house was suspended in midair. Nephthys was still sitting by the window in a trance, and a breeze was blowing beside her. But Nephthys ignored it. At this time, the upper god Loopers walked out of the room inside the temple. He looked solemn and said, something happened in the desert, and the god of order asked the gods to help. However, Nephthys was indifferent. Robust did not get a response, and looked at Nephthys in confusion. Then he saw the letter from the god of order beside Nephthys. He was about to ask Nephthys what happened. Nephthys, who was leaning against the window, turned around, looked at Robust, and said coldly, I don't want to go today. Hearing this, fine black scales appeared on Robust's forehead. He said worriedly, Nephthys, if you are not feeling well today, we cannot go. Do you need me to ask Sekhmet to come over? No. Nephthys replied coldly, and continued to turn his head and look out the window. Robust nodded and said, Dragon bone flower? Okay, you have a good rest. I'll go pick some of your favorite dragon bone flowers. After that, Robust left the temple excitedly. TSK. A male voice sounded in the shadows, his tone full of pity. He is really pitiful. He is a high god after all, but now he is like a puppet talking to himself. Nephthys glanced at the shadow corner of the temple and sneered, it seems that you made him a puppet. The voice in the shadow smiled and said, there is a piece of news that should make you feel better. What news? Nephthys set her eyes on the corner. Amon took action, the voice in the shadow said happily. Nephthys sat up, her face full of confusion. Why did he suddenly take action? When I went to find him, his attitude did not seem to be quick to take action. Normal, the voice in the shadow explained. That guy is very keen on lying, no matter what. As long as he feels like lying, then the answer given is a lie that contradicts the facts. Hearing this, Nephthys' eyes were full of disgust. If what you said is a disgusting existence, it's rare that we have the same opinion. The voice in the shadow said sincerely, it can be seen that he is indeed a disgusting guy. The end of the Nile. Amon, wearing a golden goose feather crown and a black and gold skirt, looked solemnly in the direction of the desert. He held a tusk in his hand. The tusk was intact. Who made the first move? Amon wanted to know the answer, but now is not the time to explore. In the current situation, the power of faith collected before is not enough, but now it is enough. The goose feather must be retrieved. Seize this opportunity. South of the desert, Sekhmet and Shu came to another oasis without the blessing of God. It is also full of death and pain. She did not let the lioness carved by the divine pattern go down to heal the oasis. Instead, she said to Shu on the side, "Choose 3 people." Shu swept across the entire oasis and selected a middle-aged man, an old woman, and a young child. Then, a gust of wind blew through the oasis. The 3 people who were selected disappeared with the wind. At the outermost edge of the oasis, the man who was leaning against the wall and suppressing the pain saw something strange. A lioness with metal inlaid on her forehead and green hair? The man started crying. He must be dying. That's why he saw this. Roar. The lioness raised her head and roared. The sound was so penetrating that the whole oasis could hear it. Their reactions were different. The man who thought he was going to die also realized that the lioness was real, and he also felt that he had strength. Chapter 74 Betrayal. On the top of the mountain, Nut and Keb, who were under the sky, also received Shu's letter. After a brief discussion, the two decided that Keb would go to the desert to protect mankind. Nut stayed to accompany Meets. The reason for this decision was that Meets had been having nightmares recently. He dreamed that his true body, the stars, was completely destroyed by the demon snake. Therefore, Nut and Keb were worried that Meets would stay alone under the sky. After Keb left through the gate of God, Nut sang a hymn to Meets, a hymn to the sun. "Mother Goddess, is there no hymn to praise the stars?" Nut heard Meets ask this. This question made Nut smile, and she said, "You haven't become a god yet, so there are no hymns belonging to you. When you become a god, there will be countless hymns belonging to the stars." "So that's it, I know." Listening to Meets' voice, Nut's eyebrows were full of tenderness, and she continued to sing the hymn of the sun. She wanted to use the supreme and omnipotent sun god to dispel the haze brought by Meets' nightmares. But a moment later, Nut heard Meets ask this. "Mother God, since the sun god is omnipotent, why don't you seek the help of the sun god? Let him give me life and become the god of the stars. Then, the mother god and the father god can meet me." Nut's eyes flashed with resentment, and she said, "The sun god can't help us for some reasons. Besides, the god of life is your sister Isis. We can seek the help of your sister." After saying that, when Nut wanted to change the subject, she heard Meets shouting excitedly, "Mother God, Amon asked you to return the goose feather to him. He has a new way to awaken the moon god." "Really?" Nut was overjoyed. "Really, Mother God, go quickly." Nut listened to Meets' urging. She took out the ankh and was about to leave, but she was worried about Meets. "Can you stay alone?" Hearing Meets say it was okay, Nut drew the gate of God and left. Desert, red grass oasis. This is also an oasis that believes in the desert god. However, when Seth arrived, a god had temporarily cleared the black spot disease. It was the sandfruit god Lillos. "I didn't change their beliefs," Lillos said. "They still believe in the desert god." Seth naturally knew that they could feel the power of their faith in him from the oasis in front of them. "I will protect them." "Thank you, Lillos." The existing believers are important to him, Seth. Lillos protected his believers, and Seth would naturally thank him. "It's just a small matter. The desert god is serious." Lillos waved his hand and said, "The oasis belongs to the protection of the desert god. I'm leaving first." "Okay." Seth smiled and nodded. The lower god Lillos turned around and ran away. In fact, when he was clearing the oasis, he knew that the people here believed in the desert god. At that time, Lillos' first thought was to run. However, he thought that if Seth knew about this, he would most likely end up like the Agave god Milan. So he stayed to take care of the oasis and said that the desert god asked him to come and save them. Seth naturally didn't know what Lillos was thinking. He summoned a giant yellow sandbird with his divine power to protect the oasis. Then, he went to the nearest oasis that believed in him. He remembered that the oasis was called Duckgrass Oasis. The high priest was an interesting person. As the high priest, he manipulated the patriarch's every move. He was a bit like Damses, but different. Damses would respect and listen to the patriarch's practices, and would not interfere with the patriarch in most cases. The biggest difference is their age. One is a teenager, and the other is like a candle in the wind and may die at any time. At the junction of the desert and the plain, Isis and Osiris flew over the junction. In the distance, They saw an oasis covered with corpses, covered with black spots and no living things. It's black spot disease. Isis stopped, looking solemn. Osiris frowned slightly. It has spread here. Shu's letter mentioned that it was only a few days ago that this black spot disease was discovered. Isis felt something was wrong. When we changed the landform yesterday, everything was normal in the oasis. Hearing this, Osiris shook his head and said, maybe a few people got sick yesterday, then all the humans in the entire oasis were infected. Indeed, Isis agreed with Osiris's speculation. She looked at the oasis full of corpses and couldn't help but feel a little worried. The sudden death of a large number of lives, and the lack of new life, would have a certain impact on her authority. Maybe it would affect her plan. Let's search for other oases along this oasis, Osiris suggested. Isis looked back at the plain behind her and said worriedly, at the current rate, the plain will soon be full of black spot disease. Osiris comforted Isis, don't worry, Sekhmet will heal everything. At another junction of the desert and the plain, a gust of wind swept the three people to the plain, and then slowly dissipated. The middle-aged man, old woman, and young child who were taken to a strange land and left their familiar tribe were terrified and wanted to escape. However, all they could do was fall to the ground and wail in pain. They were infected with black spot disease and were in unbearable pain all over their bodies. In midair, Shu and Sekhmet stood side by side. Sekhmet mobilized the healing power and easily cured the three. The three people were stunned for a long time when their bodies suddenly recovered. Then they thanked the sun god and prayed to the sun god. Shu stared at the three people. He could see that Sekhmet only cured the three people. He did not attach divine power to them. According to previous experience, these three people will soon be infected with black spot disease again. At most, it will take no more than 1 solar hour. Thinking of this, Shu used divine power to prevent them from returning to the desert. After the middle-aged man recovered, he did want to take the two tribesmen back to the desert. They still had relatives alive in the tribe. However, no matter how they walked, they could not walk into the desert. In addition, thinking that all the people in the tribe had been infected with black spot disease, if they went back, they would definitely be infected again. In this case, it would be better to walk into the plain. After saying this idea, the old woman agreed. We don't know which direction the tribe is in. Instead of dying in the desert, it's better to find a way to survive on the plains. After saying this, the old woman took the child's hand and looked at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man found a stick on the ground for self-defense and walked in front. In the air, Shu and Sekhmet followed. However, with an old man and a young child, they walked and stopped. After a solar hour, they didn't go far. The black spot disease has not recurred. Sekhmet looked at Shu. Shu naturally saw it. But the desert will kill all humans with black spot disease. This matter is very serious, and we must wait for some more time to prove that they will not be infected again. Wait a little longer, Shu said. Sekhmet said nothing. Duck Grass Oasis. Seth stood above the oasis, looking at the empty oasis. He felt confused. Where did the people in this oasis go? Were they all killed by black spot disease? If so, there should be bodies left. While thinking about various possibilities, Seth sensed the entire oasis. The next moment, he appeared in front of a temple with intricate patterns in the center of the oasis. According to his perception, there were several corpses and a living person in the temple. Seth walked into the temple. On both sides of the wall were murals of the sun and humans. Most intelligent races believe in the sun. However, this is not the point. In front of the sun-shaped statue, there were dozens of old men with black spots all over their bodies. In front of these corpses, there was an old man leaning against the statue and breathing heavily. He was the only living person that Seth sensed. Seth wanted to know from him what happened to the Duck Grass Oasis. Was it breached by someone, or something else happened? Why was the oasis empty? However, Seth's eyes were now on the slightly smaller statue of Osiris next to the sun statue. Yes, it was the statue of Osiris. Surprised, Seth looked around the two statues, but he didn't see his statue. Doesn't this oasis believe in him? Feeling betrayed, Seth's thoughts became scattered. Negative emotions also surged up. However, Seth quickly suppressed them. Duck Grass Oasis may not have betrayed him. Maybe it was attacked by other oases, Everyone was abducted, and the statues were replaced, or they were captured by an evil god for blood sacrifice. It is also possible that their entire tribe went out to play. While imagining various possibilities, Seth walked towards the old man who was gasping and dying of black spot disease. Hearing the footsteps, the old man barely opened his eyes. Seeing Seth, he wanted to say something. Unfortunately, he was tortured by black spot disease and could no longer speak. He could only utter some unclear syllables. Seth mobilized his power and authority, and bestowed a divine power on the old man. In the blink of an eye, the black spots on the old man's body faded and his face became ruddy. It is very simple for any god to cure black spot disease. The difficulty is that black spot disease cannot be completely removed. It requires gods to spend energy and divine power to cure it over and over again. After the old man recovered, he stared at Seth with wide eyes and asked, "Who are you?" Seth was not surprised that the old man did not recognize him as the god of the desert. After all, when he showed his divine power, he was in his true form with a beast's head and a human body. The people of Duck Grass Oasis should only know his human form through the statue he gave. It would be difficult for the old man to associate the statue with him. Where did the people of Duck Grass Oasis go? Seth looked at the old man coldly. The old man felt that the handsome and mysterious man in front of him was as scary as a monster. He swallowed and said, "They moved away." "Moved away?" Seth raised his eyebrows. "Yes, they moved away." The old man was afraid that the man in front of him would be dissatisfied, so he explained the reason. The chief and the priest decided to move the tribe to the plains, and they no longer believe in the god of the desert, but instead believe in the noble god of agriculture. Dozens of us old guys can't travel in the desert at all, so we were left behind. Except for me, they all died of strange and terrible diseases. After saying this, the old man tried not to make any sound, because he felt anger and murderous intent from the man in front of him. Chapter 75 Investigation. Seth had anticipated the betrayal. The desert is not suitable for human survival, and the plain is very suitable for human survival. Therefore, after confirming the plancturing of the desert, he had already made sure that most of the tribes would go to the plains after the plancturing was completed. If they did not stay in the desert, he, the desert god, would naturally be forgotten. Therefore, Seth was working to support the human tribes. The blessing of power and war was definitely what the tribes desired for the tribes that were not blocked by the desert. However, the plancturing of the desert lasted only a dozen solar days. The tribes that believed in him changed their beliefs and ran away collectively. The most important thing was that he took the initiative to find this tribe. This was the tribe of the Duck Grass Oasis humiliating him. Where did they go? Seth asked, suppressing his anger. The old man hesitated for a moment and pointed to the north. The tribe went that way. "Ha!" Seth sneered. "You are lying." He gave each tribe that believed in him a statue that gave the desert divine power. His things, as long as he wanted, he would naturally know where they were. Ironically, after abandoning the desert god, they were reluctant to leave the statue behind. The old man shook his head quickly. "I didn't lie. They just went to the north." Seth sneered at the old man and said, "Lies will bring death." Suddenly, the old man seemed to know something, pointed at Seth, his eyes full of shock. "You are the desert." Before he could say anything, the old man was killed by Seth. A moment later, his soul stood up from the old man's body. Similarly, Seth ruthlessly wiped out the soul. If the old man told the truth, Seth would send him to an oasis blessed by God, with the remaining breath of God when he healed the old man. It would not be a problem for the old man to live over 100 years. Unfortunately, he did not tell the truth. To protect his people? Maybe. But his people were destined to die. Seth put away all his expressions, left the temple, and walked into the air. The yellow sand around the Duck Grass Oasis seemed to come alive, quickly devouring everything in the oasis. In the blink of an eye, the oasis turned into a desert. Seth sensed the location of the statue he had given to the Duck Grass Oasis tribe and chased after it. Their entire tribe was migrating, so they definitely couldn't move fast. The source of the Nile, Nut, the sky goddess with sky blue skin, a sky blue crown and a starlit dress, arrived. This was Nut's second visit to the source of the Nile. Unlike the first time, this time, She felt almost no guilt. The source of the Nile was as barren as ever, and the temple they had built while waiting for Ammon had long been removed. "Give me back the goose feather." Suddenly, Ammon's voice appeared on the side. Nut turned around and looked. He wore a golden goose feather crown, a black and white skirt, and had a handsome face. After taking out the golden goose feather, Nut did not give it to Ammon immediately, but asked, "How long will it take to awaken Khonsu?" The moon god Khonsu gave the stars a blessing, allowing the dim stars to emit starlight, and it allows the stars to remain in an eternal state. Therefore, Isis could not give life to the stars. If the stars want to gain life, Khonsu must take back the gift. Ammon smiled and said, "It will take 10 days. The moon god will wake up in 10 days. Nut heard this. Her eyes were full of expectation, and she proposed at the same time. "Make a vow. The moon god will wake up in 10 days. It is related to whether meats can get a new life. Nut must get Ammon's vow." The confidence she has in doing this is that Ammon took the initiative to find meats. Let them come to the source of the Nile to find him. In return, Ammon will definitely get something he needs from them. Now it seems that such a thing is the golden goose feather that stores the blank power of faith. The smile on Ammon's face was put away, and he asked seriously, "Swear to the sun god?" "Yes." Nut nodded. "Swear to the sun god, and the moon god Khonsu will be awakened from his sleep in 10 days. Ammon made a vow happily. A ray of sunlight wrapped around Ammon's wrist and immediately dissipated. This is a sign that the oath is true. Nut's heart was completely relieved, and she returned the golden goose feather to Ammon. Ammon was very mysterious and did not exist among the gods. He did not appear in the several divine meetings in Heliopolis. He could also appear quietly near them. He also had a means to store the blank power of faith. However, Nut firmly believed that Ammon could not lie under the power of the supreme sun god Ra. Looking at Nut, who was extremely happy, Ammon accepted the goose feather and said lightly, "You should leave." Nut said nothing and quickly left the source of the Nile. Watching the sky goddess leave, Ammon's mouth curled up a mocking smile. If the moon god has never fallen asleep, how can he be awakened? Besides, there is more than one god who controls the sun. Lying is really fun, especially the feeling at the moment when the deception is successful. It really makes the gods intoxicated. At the junction of the desert and the plain, it was almost evening at this moment. She looked at the 10 people who did not suffer from black spot disease again and sighed. Put the humans living in the desert on the plain. After being cured, they will not suffer from black spot disease again and again. On the contrary, if people who grew up in the plains are placed in the desert oasis, they will soon suffer from black spot disease, and it cannot be completely cured. Sekhmet's conclusion is correct. The desert is the source of the spread of black spot disease. Set is the god of desert, war, and strength. He himself has no authority related to poison. Now the desert is poisonous. It can only be Set, the god of the desert, who has a problem. Shu summoned a palm-sized bluebird with the power of order. "Send them back to where they came from." "Yes," the bluebird replied respectfully. Then it flew to the scattered humans on the plain and swallowed them one by one. After swallowing everyone, the bluebird sent them back following the breath of order. After doing this, Shu raised his hand and wrote a series of holy book words. These words condensed into a breeze and blew into the desert. "Let's go to Set's temple and wait for him," Shu said to Sekhmet, who had been watching silently. "Okay." Sekhmet nodded. Deep in the desert, Thoth, wearing a heron crown, a blue skirt, and gold rings with inscriptions on his neck, wrists, and ankles, stopped in front of an oasis full of corpses. He silently recorded the situation of the oasis. Next to Thoth was Mat, who had an ostrich feather in her hair and a white linen skirt. Mat surveyed the entire oasis. After a moment, she took out a long white feather. The feather exuded the breath of truth. Bending down, Mat took the feather and tapped the ground of the oasis. The power of truth spread to the entire oasis. Suddenly, a black evil aura appeared in the center of the oasis. Mat rushed over immediately. Thoth, who was recording the situation of the oasis, put away the papyrus and reed pen and followed Mat. After a moment, they arrived at the center of the oasis. The evil aura revealed by the power of truth was a ruined house. Thoth used his divine power to move the broken wood and broken stones. Finally, Something with an evil aura was revealed under the ruins, a small pile of gold nuggets. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.